We got attempted robbery. They pulled up on us with a gun. We could have died.
It's a heart-stopping video. 4 young men take a big gamble and make big news.
This would-be robber picked the wrong group to mess with.
They decided to fight back.
It happens at 3:38 a.m. on March 24th, 2019, in Oakland Park, Florida. When the men stop for gas after a night out on the town.
They're pumping gas into their vehicle. A black Sonata pulls up close to them.
What happens next is terrifying, and it's all caught on surveillance cameras. As the young men hang outside their car, they have no idea that a man is coming straight towards them, and he has a gun.
Suddenly, they are in the middle of a robbery. He's asking them to give up whatever they have.
One guy puts his hands up. The gunman tackles him.
Physically starts to jostle him. And then his friends start to attack the man with the gun.
It's an all-out brawl. Then, out of nowhere, a second man appears.
He's trying to push off the victims off of his friend. A wrestle ensues. They get the armed subject down on the ground.
We have young men attempting to disarm this armed robber.
Then, something almost impossible happens.
The gun falls to the ground. Victims are able to pick up the gun and point it back at them.
It's total chaos. The assailants retreat to their car. And even though their gun is now pointed right back at them, they're not giving up.
We don't know what's going to happen next.
But then, the robbers get into their car and take off. And one of the terrified victims frantically dials 911.
We got attempted robbery.
So are you an employee there?
No, I'm not. They pulled up on us with a gun and we took their gun.
Take a deep breath for me.
In the confusion, he isn't even sure if everyone is safe.
Did they get you? Did they shoot you? My heart is pounding
Okay,
right now.
take a deep breath for me. Did he have a weapon, you said?
Yes, we have the weapon.
Okay, the person who had that gun when they threatened you.
Did they threaten us? They pulled up with a gun.
Is there anybody injured? Anybody need an ambulance?
Does anybody need an ambulance? You don't need an ambulance.
No?
No. It was scary, though.
I understand that. Just stay right on the line with me, okay?
I can remember my heart was still pounding hard for like 3 hours later. We were just in shock. It was really surreal.
It turns out that the boys are all related. But what started as a fun night of partying
We were celebrating my cousin's 21st birthday.
has turned into an absolute nightmare. 2 men have just tried to rob them. They don't know if they're coming back. And when they turn their attention to the gun that's now on the ground, they are horrified.
Is it loaded? Is it bullets in it?
It's got magazine and bullets in it, bro.
We could have died.
Just leave it right where it is. Stay on the phone with me and stay away from it, okay?
Surveillance cameras capturing the moments that the men turn the tables on the gunman.
When 4 young men fight back against the robbers who attacked them at a Florida gas station, the video immediately goes viral.
When I woke up, I had over 100 DMs. It was just so insane that I couldn't handle it.
It all begins on Saturday, March 23rd, 2019, when they drive 2 hours to Miami from Fort Lauderdale. Brothers Alex and Eric, who are from Indiana, are in Florida hanging out with their cousins Jacob and Alec, who are also brothers. And that night, they get a late start.
We're going to this club, and we can't go until midnight because my brother, he's not 21 until midnight. Stayed for a couple of hours, had like a really good time. About 3 a.m. is when we left the club. Started heading back to Fort Lauderdale. And that's when we got the low gas signal on the car.
They pull into a gas station just after 3:30 a.m. 3 of them step out to get some air while they fill up.
I was asleep in the back of the car. I had no idea what was going on.
At first, none of them have any idea that someone is trying to rob them.
I don't see the gun until my cousin Alec actually puts his hands up. He sticks the gun to my little brother's rib cage. It's like, just defend, yourself and your family. I grab for the gun, and he yanks it away. I actually put my arm around the guy's neck. I got out of the car. The whole thing had already started to unfold by the time I had woken up.
But as soon as Eric does realize what's happening, he has only one focus.
My whole thing was to get the gun out of his hand. We didn't know if the gun was loaded or not. I was waiting for a gunshot to go off. Our lives were definitely in danger.
They are in a fight for their lives, and none of them are prepared to fend off yet another attacker.
At this point, we're not thinking, oh, there's a second guy, we have to look out for him. I was like, oh no, like there's a second one. He just came, swarmed, and pushed everybody off. When I stood up, I had no energy left.
It's Eric who finally manages to rip the gun away from their attackers, and when he does, he's stunned.
It was just crazy.
The robbers seem every bit as shocked as they are.
They're begging for their gun, give us the gun back.
But then, the robbers suddenly drive off, and Jacob dials 911, panicked that they are going to come back.
I still don't know how it all worked out for us the way it did.
But the police arrive quickly.
First thing the police said to us is, you guys are crazy. You don't go after somebody with a loaded gun.
I was a loaded 9mm. We could have had a quadruple homicide. 4 dead young men. They just got very, very lucky that nobody got hurt on this.
The cousins know how lucky they are.
It was more scary to kind of look back and have that, 20/20 hindsight of, maybe we should have just put our hands up and not done what we did.
Still, 2 of them, the brothers from Indiana, are actually licensed to carry concealed guns.
I do have experience with handguns and other types of guns. We've gone through the necessary classes to learn how to defend ourselves. We just felt like if we could get control of the situation, we would not have anyone get hurt.
And even in the midst of all the struggling and confusion, police say they were quick on their feet.
I saw the license plate and remembered the numbers on the license plate.
No, they did a good job as far as getting the descriptions of the 2 subjects, the vehicle description along with the tag.
The getaway driver, 33-year-old Kevin Campbell, is arrested just hours after the incident. And with the media's help, police soon find the gunman as well.
And the registered owner of the vehicle called in. The getaway driver was her boyfriend. And the actual subject who she saw on TV attempting to rob these 4 young men was her brother.
31-year-old Travis Jones is arrested 2 days later. Both men face charges that include attempted robbery with a firearm and are awaiting trial. At a news conference, Alec, who turned 21 just hours before the attempted robbery, admits that he was terrified.
It didn't seem real, and I'm just kind of put my hands up because I was like, I didn't want any issues.
And even though his brother and cousins say they were fighting for their lives and each other, they are all relieved that it turned out the way it did.
We were very, very lucky. So lucky.
Coming up next, another man bravely stands up to a gunman.
So he grabs this gun with his bare hands.
It's a terrifying scenario.
The suspect came in the open garage door, shotgun in hand.
Stunning the men as they face the barrel of a shotgun. It all unfolds on September 12, 2018, in the middle of a busy workday at an equipment supply business in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Just before 1 p.m., an armed gunman storms into an open garage.
Here's two guys that are just going about their business, doing their job. And now suddenly, out of nowhere, a guy walks in with a shotgun.
Even stranger, the gun is cloaked in a blanket.
What is his intention? Is he there to steal? Is he there to kill somebody?
This situation was extremely dangerous. Now they have to decide, what are we going to do about this?
The gunman starts yelling at the employees. One of them puts up his hands and retreats. But the other employee takes a different approach. He talks to the intruder. And then he makes a very bold move.
He goes and engages this gunman in some small talk. When the gunman is distracted, that's where he takes action.
So he grabs this gun with his bare hands, and he doesn't show any fear. He's just laser focused on trying to get that gun away from this guy. That gun could go off at any second. Someone could get shot, someone could get killed. This could go wrong in so many ways.
In a matter of a few minutes, an ordinary workday has turned into a dangerous and potentially lethal struggle.
He knew absolutely nothing about this guy. What his plan was, where he came from. You don't know what kind of crazy plans this guy has going on in his mind. And you're on the edge of your seat, and it's terrifying.
But this gunman picked the wrong person to mess with. Turns out the employee who is trying to wrangle the gun away from him knows exactly what he's doing.
I told myself a long time ago that if I have anything to do about it, I'm not going to be a victim, and I'm not going to let anybody around me be a victim.
65-year-old David Mann says from the moment the gunman walked in, he knew the intruder wasn't joking.
We just kind of looked up, dumbfounded, well, what's going on? He was probably 15 feet away. The first thing I noticed was the shotgun, how he was holding it, and I thought I could see that it was off safety, and that concerned me.
Mann's young trainee, Devin, who has only been working with him for 6 months, immediately tries to get away.
He was backing up. I think he just didn't want to antagonize the guy. He didn't want to take any chances that, he might go nuts on us.
And when the armed man demands some keys, David quickly formulates a plan.
He says, give me the keys to that truck. So I stand up and I look at him and holding my arms up, kind of in bewilderment. I say, I'm not understanding what's going on. I said, what truck are you talking about?
David is hoping to confuse the gunman.
I'm playing dumb and stupid, and all that's going on. I'm wandering over towards him. I kept watching his eyes. I saw confusion. I think I might have even registered that he was kind of panicked. And as soon as I was close enough, I just reached out and grabbed the gun and pointed the barrel up.
Now, events have taken a whole different turn. David's trainee makes a run for it.
So we see this guy back up, hands up, and he's like, I gotta get the hell out of here.
I did not see him at all because he was off to my right. I don't think I took my eyes off this guy's face. I mean, we were that close.
David is only focused on one thing. He wants to get that gun, but the intruder is not giving it up.
I kept telling him to let it go, and he didn't say anything. I said, do you want to die?
When an armed man holding a shotgun wrapped in a blanket marches into an equipment store in New Mexico, a terrifying scenario unfolds.
I just decided I was going to go take the gun away from him if I could. As soon as my hands were on the gun, I was not going to let go, and he was not going to shoot anybody.
In the midst of the chaos, David Mann's trainee flees. It appears he's too scared to stick around. But then, all of a sudden, he returns.
He had gone out to go to his truck. He had had a baseball bat in the truck by the seat. Apparently the truck was locked, so he comes running back in because he remembered that he had a handgun in his lunchbox, which was in the shop.
And that's when the tense situation takes a dramatic turn.
So when he comes back, that's it. This is the pivotal moment when everything changes. He body checks him, knocks the gun out of his hands, and runs.
I just saw a blur. I did not realize that it was Devin that had hit this feller. I just know that both of us get pushed back. Then he tries to back up himself, and I jerk the gun out of his hands.
Now, the tables have turned, and the gunman makes a hasty retreat.
He was scared. He was running. He wanted to get away. When he got 50 feet away or so, he started looking over his shoulder at me.
For a moment, David considers chasing after him.
You know, I'm old and cranky. I don't want to run after the guy.
David and his trainee are shaken, but safe. But who is this shotgun-wielding man? Why did he target this store? And where has he gone?
David is standing there with this guy's shotgun. And now this unarmed gunman is running down the street. We don't know where he's going.
David's trainee is already on the phone with 911, and the police arrive just minutes later.
It was an unmarked canine unit that showed up. He just happened to be right around the corner.
When the canine unit shows up, missing pieces of this puzzle begin to fall into place. It all begins when 3 people in a red sedan lose control of the car at a nearby intersection and get into a wild crash. But then they decide not to stick around to explain anything to the police. They just jump out of the car and make a run for it.
So there's this big crash. The 3 of them run. There's 2 guys and a female, and the police are chasing after them.
All 3 suspects bolt in different directions, and that's when one of them, the one who has a shotgun, sees David's garage.
So our guy, blanket shotgun guy, he sees the garage and he thinks, well, hey, there's a place I can go and get my getaway vehicle.
He happened to come towards our shop, and I think he was just looking for some way to get away because he knew he was in trouble.
As police hunt for the 3 suspects, including the man who David confronted in the garage, they ask the media for help.
Police are still looking for that suspect. They do have their car, though, and say they should be able to pull any fingerprints from it.
And with wide coverage of the story,
that crook walked into an Albuquerque business with the shotgun in his hand.
David is quickly hailed as a hero for bravely standing up to the gunman, the kind of hero you definitely don't want to mess with.
We have a standing joke about the incident. Don't mess with Dave. Don't ask him for his keys to his truck.
So David is naturally hailed as a hero, because when do you see a guy with nerves of steel like that to think, I'm just gonna play dumb and get that gun? And then to actually take this loaded gun out of this guy's hands, he reminds me of Clint Eastwood. To be able to think like that under those conditions, he reminds me of someone who just has the cool strategy of a true fighter.
The female suspect who fled the car accident is quickly apprehended. She identifies the man with a shotgun as 36-year-old Demetrio Trujillo, a man on the run with multiple felony convictions. Trujillo is arrested 1 month later. As for David, even as he laughs at all the jokes about what a tough guy he is, he's also well aware that there could have been a steep price to pay for his courage.
I remember thinking back that this is kind of weird. I'm not upset or scared. I mean, I guess I felt threatened, but I didn't feel like I was in danger. I just thought, I've got to get the gun away from him because he could hurt somebody. I just am glad that I reacted the way I did.
It's a stunning scene caught on camera in the middle of the street.
Stop! Are you done?
Now to a frightening road rage incident. It was all caught on the motorcyclist's GoPro camera.
Stop it!
July 11th, 2015, Yuma, Arizona. At about 12:30 in the afternoon, a motorcyclist comes to a stop at a busy traffic light. All seems normal until the motorcyclist turns to look behind him.
You got a problem? Yeah, I got a problem.
With no warning, the man slings a punch at the motorcyclist.
What would make this man take road rage so far as to get out of his vehicle and start to assault another motorist?
Yeah, I got a problem.
Whatever is behind it, the angry motorist won't stop. Then the motorcyclist's girlfriend steps off the bike.
You touch him.
He just full on attacks her.
And it doesn't end there.
You touch him.
When the motorcyclist tries to defend her, the fuming driver lunges at him again.
Hey! You better step back right now!
This is just getting worse. First he punches this guy, then shoves the girlfriend. He has passed the point of no return.
As the biker takes out his phone to call 911,
Call the
young couple tries to talk the man down. But he's not having it. Quickly, things get even uglier as he takes another swing at the biker.
You're gonna get mad. You're gonna get mad.
It becomes a full-on wrestling match as both men tumble to the sidewalk.
You better stop!
The force of the fall makes the crazed motorist trip on the curb and break his ankle. But even that doesn't stop this guy.
I'm gonna get up there. I'm gonna.
Where is all of this going to end? It turns out the motorcyclist, whose name is Cody Munoz, is only 24 years old. And a violent road rage incident is the last thing he expects on a relaxed afternoon ride with his girlfriend, Louisa Loy.
We just went out for a cruise, went out to lunch, and we were just heading back home when everything all happened. Everything happened so fast.
At first, when the angry motorist comes up behind him, Cody thinks he can just ignore his yelling.
Yeah, I got a problem.
But then, when he starts throwing punches, Cody knows this is no ordinary beef.
Stop it!
And the moment the raging man gets aggressive with Louisa, Cody can no longer stand aside.
She's 5 foot, 100 pounds. He can throw a punch at me, yell at me, push me all day, but the second he did that to my girlfriend, that's when we're not just gonna let this go.
You better stop!
With his attacker pinned to the pavement, he starts yelling at him.
Stop! Are you done? Are you done?
But incredibly, the out-of-control driver still won't back down.
Are you gonna get up? Get up and relax, okay? I'm gonna get up there. I'm gonna.
What will this road rager do next?
Call the cops right now.
A Yuma, Arizona street becomes a wild scene of road rage when a belligerent driver punches a young motorcyclist.
You touch him.
What I had done that originally that I believe made him mad was that I lane filtered or lane split in between his car and the city bus.
It turns out, just minutes earlier, Cody Munoz is out riding with his girlfriend, Louisa, when he decides to pass a city bus by riding his bike between the two lanes of traffic. Called lane splitting, it's illegal in Arizona.
I did that for the reason of not being behind the city bus. It's just not a good idea to be in a blind spot of a large vehicle. I wasn't trying to jump the line and get ahead of everybody. And just from doing that, ticked him off.
To pass the bus, Cody pulls in between it and another driver, who turns out to be 51-year-old Lee Shizmenos. And what Cody has just done apparently makes him so furious that he begins tailgating the couple.
He got behind me and started honking his horn, cussing and spitting at me.
I started noticing someone kind of yelling at us. He's like, yeah, he's like kind of tailgating me. He's like putting his fists up. He was just outraged.
But I thought, he's gonna get over it. The light's gonna turn green. We're gonna be on our way. No big deal.
But to this angry driver, it is a big deal. And that's when things get out of control.
I thought, okay, can't believe he's getting out of his car at a red light.
I look again to my left and he's out of the car. There's no time for us to react. He just decided to punch Cody on the helmet.
Stop it!
There was definitely a craziness in his eyes. His eyes were bulging out of his head.
I'm gonna get up there. I'm gonna.
This guy is so angry, it's a blind rage. He's just gonna do the first thing that comes to his mind, and he doesn't care about the consequences.
You better step back right now!
In that short amount of time between me trying to get off the bike to talk to him, my girlfriend had already gotten off the bike, and I see him shoving her away. I didn't think that he would go that far.
After taking a couple of swings, the older man got taken down.
You better stop! Stop! Are you done?
But despite being pinned to the ground, the hot-headed driver isn't cooling off.
Are you gonna behave? I'm gonna get up there. I'm gonna. Call the cops right now. How old are you? Shouldn't you know by now it's not what you do?
When a witness pulls up to the scene, the driver denies everything.
This dude just assaulted me for no reason. You saw it?
No, I saw it all. I saw it all.
You didn't see it.
And incredibly, even claims that he's the victim.
You pushed my girlfriend? She weighs 100 pounds.
She assaulted me.
No, she did not.
But that's when he gets a shock of his own.
Guess what? I have you all on camera, so we're gonna see.
I told him, well, I have it all on camera. As soon as I said that, the switch flipped. Because I don't think he realized up until that point that there was actually a camera running.
Even in the midst of this crazy, violent scene, Cody somehow manages to calmly speak to the driver.
Dude, I did nothing to you.
Yeah, you just broke the law.
He said, you broke the law to me, which is hilarious that he would say that to me. You got mad at me. You're gonna assault me because I went in between you at a light.
Hey! You better step back right now! You're gonna punch me and assault me for that.
Yep.
And you think that's the right thing to do?
But once the driver realizes he's being taped and other motorists begin to gather round,
Calm down. Calm down.
then he finally stops talking.
What's going on, man?
This dude assaulted me for no reason at a stoplight.
The man is aided by witnesses and soon arrested by police. And Cody is instantly hailed as a hero for his calm response.
Two wrongs don't make a right. I wasn't gonna start assaulting him on the ground.
I'm really impressed at how calm the motorcyclist is, considering the fact that he was just assaulted by this angry motorist.
Are you gonna behave?
Soon, the video racks up over 16 million views.
A few notable motovloggers that had commented on my video and saying, good job keeping your cool and applauding me.
While Cody maintains his composure, there's a big reason why the driver lost his.
I got a problem.
So the irony of this incident is that the motorist who's chastising this motorcyclist for committing a traffic violation, turns out he shouldn't even be behind the wheel himself.
Stop!
The driver admits to police that he had 4 to 5 shots of whiskey before driving and is charged with assault and DUI.
The alcohol probably made him more aggressive, more violent, and also probably contributed to him not caring about repercussions. Road rage plus driving under the influence, not a good combo.
With emotions running so high, police say Cody is extremely lucky things didn't take a more dangerous turn.
I think Cody handled it really, really well. I'm just really grateful that nothing too serious happened.
After their terrifying ordeal, there's one thing this young couple makes sure to do before hitting the open road.
Anytime I get on the bike, the camera starts recording.
For Cody and Louisa, it's a wild ride they'll always remember, and one that ultimately brought them closer.
We're actually engaged. We'll definitely never forget it. That's definitely the craziest thing I'd ever recorded on my helmet camera, probably to this day.
Coming up, another shocking assault caught on camera.
He attacks her. She tries to defend herself, and then it becomes ugly pretty quickly.
August 31st, 2019. A woman is working alone in her family's insurance agency when a man walks in.
It was all very casual, no red flags.
He's asking her some questions, and then he leaves. But when he returns, something's a little odd. He's wearing a different hat.
And that's when security cameras capture a frightening scene. The man flashes a knife, demanding cash on the manager's desk. And in an instant, a regular day in the office turns into a life or death situation.
This is getting very scary, very fast.
He thinks he's gonna make a clean, quick getaway with that cash, but I don't think he was expecting what was going to happen next.
Instead of handing over the money, the woman immediately takes action, punching the man in the groin.
This is absolutely fight or flight. That shock factor would have sent most of us into a paralytic fear zone. But in this case, it was the opposite. She went full-on fight mode.
That's when the knife-wielding thief gets vicious.
And she starts to struggle with him, and they are going at it in the middle of the office floor.
As things escalate, the man becomes extremely aggressive, grabbing her by the hair.
Pulling a woman's hair is pretty violent and terrifying. He's making this as intimidating and violent as possible because he sees she's not backing down.
But incredibly, this woman stands her ground. Even as he tries to force her back towards the desk so he can grab all that cash.
He drags her across that office, and she looks like she's fighting for her life.
At times, the robber's knife is just inches from the woman's face.
This is not a fair match at all.
Then, it seems like the woman is going to get a break.
The customer starts to walk in the door. It seems as if there may be an opportunity for some help. But that customer sees what's happening, decides they don't want any part of it, and they leave the store.
To her dismay, the woman is alone again, desperately trying to fend off this robber. Her name is Concepcion Escalante, and the 23-year-old says that day felt like time seemed to stand still during the lightning-quick attack.
It felt like it was like 10 minutes, and I thought I was screaming or saying something, but I wasn't.
For Concepcion, it begins as a routine day. She's just a couple hours away from finishing her workday when the nightmare unfolds.
I used to normally be alone on Fridays and Saturdays, and it was never a problem before. When I saw the knife, I thought it was a joke at first. I thought maybe someone was just playing a joke on me.
Just 20 minutes earlier, the same man had walked into the office looking and acting very different.
First time he came in, he asked for an insurance quote. So I just said, well, I need your ID and I need the VIN number. So he said, oh, I'm kind of in a rush, so I'll just come back. I didn't think it was weird. Just thought he's in a rush.
The man has no intention of going to get his license. Instead, he returns, oddly, in a different hat, flashes a steak knife, and demands cash. But even then, at first, Concepcion thinks she can get rid of him easily.
I just thought, okay, well, maybe if you take away the knife, well, he'll go away. Which he didn't, and I didn't grab the knife. Not in time.
When she realizes the man intends to rob her, she's angry.
I was just really mad at being a family business. Definitely made me want to not let him take it.
When you're angry, your brain sends off chemicals that cause your muscles to tense up to be prepared for warfare.
And Concepcion is determined to wrestle the man's weapon away from him.
I thought he dropped the knife. So I bent down to try to pick it up, and that's when we fell backwards.
That's when things really escalate. The man kicks her hard in the ribs, and with the knife still in his hand, there's no telling what he'll do next.
I wasn't sure how it was gonna go when we fell. Is he gonna try to stab me?
If he decides to use that knife, this is gonna go to a whole other level. This could get really bad really quickly for her.
When a man posing as a customer walks into Concepcion Escalante's office, she has no idea she is about to get in the fight of her life.
So he walked in, and at first he seemed really nice.
But when he returns a second time, it's clear he's not there to buy insurance.
He said, "Give me the money that they just gave you."
It turns out the man has been watching her for a while, casing the business from the window, paying close attention as she handles several large cash transactions.
We had been walking in front of the office for about a couple hours, but I didn't notice. I wasn't really looking.
He sees as she receives $1,500 from one customer and helps count out thousands more for another.
They were purchasing a car, and I counted $4,000 in front of them, and then I gave it back. So then they left. But I think he thought I kept that money.
At first, she's stunned when the man demands the money. But she quickly decides to fight back.
I don't think he counted on me being so mad. I spend more than 8 hours there to make hard money for him to just come and take it away. I was scared, but I think I was still more mad.
One of the scariest parts is that she's alone. And as the man violently drags her around the room by the hair, she can't even get to a phone to dial 911 for help.
I think a lot of us would have just given up because we would have been in such sheer terror. But in her case, she fought even harder.
But she gets her break when the robber becomes distracted by that cash he is trying so hard to steal.
The cash is trying to go all over the place. As he's trying to fend her off, he's trying to scramble to get whatever cash falls on the floor.
With her attacker reaching for the cash, Concepcion makes her move, grabbing him tightly by the neck and pushing him closer to the door. That's where the robber gives her one final shove, and then, finally, gives up and races out the door with about $1,000.
This guy, he thinks he's going to make a quick buck, but she flipped the switch, and she became the hero in the situation, and he went running with his tail between his legs.
Concepcion is shaken up, but luckily not hurt.
After he ran off, I called my sister, and I just kind of sat on one of the desks, and I just sat there crying.
A worker at a nearby store calls police, who arrive and review the surveillance footage. They identify the suspect as 47-year-old Cesar Sarmiento Cruz, the same man they believe has been robbing local businesses for weeks.
Detectives told her they think he is the same guy who also robbed a liquor store and another business on Saturday before coming here.
When Concepcion's family watches the surveillance footage of her frightening ordeal, they are stunned.
It was really hard, like, watching it. You feel defenseless, not being able to help her. Like, maybe I should have been there with her, not let her work alone.
And to her family's astonishment, the very next day, Concepcion insists on coming right back to work. Though, with her attacker still on the loose, she's on edge.
I was scared probably the first few weeks, even to go anywhere. So I was like, okay, what if he comes back?
She was scared that he was going to come back, and she was like, finish off the job is what she kept on telling us. So she couldn't even stay home alone.
Then, about 2 weeks later, police arrest her attacker. While Concepcion is widely applauded for her courage,
she says the reason she fought back is because she doesn't want to be a victim.
Law enforcement doesn't advise risking your life over cash.
If someone is armed and they're asking for your cash, let them have what they want, and then call 911, let the police do their job.
It was good of her to like fight and stand up for herself, but she should have let him take the money. It was her life.
Still, her family says they are in awe of how she handled herself.
I had never seen her fight. she's really sweet and nice. I mean, but if she loses her temper, she loses her temper.
The biggest lesson Concepcion has learned?
Don't try to fight it. I mean, just give the money if that's what they want.
The call came in just after dawn, the kind of hour when a small town still believes it is safe, when porch lights flicker off and coffee begins to brew, when nothing violent is supposed to happen. But that morning in October 2001, the fog hadn't yet lifted from the soybean fields when a jogger stopped cold at the edge of Miller's Creek. There was something wrong with the shape in the grass. Something too still, too deliberate. And when the deputies arrived, boots sinking into wet earth, radios crackling, the illusion shattered in an instant. The body of 17-year-old Emily Harper lay half-hidden beneath a collapsed wire fence, her hair tangled with dew, her eyes open to a sky that offered no answers. By noon, the words were already spreading like wildfire through diners and church halls. Missing teen found dead. By nightfall, another phrase began to settle in, heavier, darker, possible homicide. And by the end of the week, the town of Ashford would hear the term that would haunt it for 2 decades, cold case. Ashford was the kind of place where doors were left unlocked and teachers knew every student's middle name. Population barely 6,000. A single high school. Friday night football under blinding stadium lights. Emily was not the type to disappear. Honor roll. Volunteer at the animal shelter. Worked weekends at the pharmacy on Main Street. The last confirmed sighting placed her leaving that pharmacy at 8:42 p.m., surveillance footage grainy but clear enough to show her laughing at something someone off-camera said. That someone, investigators later determined, was Daniel Reeves, assistant coach of the high school basketball team, youth mentor, Sunday school volunteer. Trusted local figure. He told police they chatted briefly in the parking lot. Nothing unusual. He watched her drive away. That was the last time anyone admitted seeing her alive. But the timeline began to fracture almost immediately. Emily never made it home. Her car was discovered the next morning 3 miles outside town, parked neatly on a gravel turnout near Miller's Creek, keys still in the ignition, driver's door unlocked. No signs of struggle inside. No broken glass. No blood. Just silence. The creek itself moved slowly, deceptively calm, as if it had not witnessed anything at all. Detectives canvassed the area. They found tire impressions, partial shoe prints in soft mud, and a single torn fabric fiber snagged on barbed wire near where her body would later be discovered. It was navy blue, the kind used in athletic warm-up jackets. But Ashford High's teams wore navy. So did half the town on game nights. The autopsy deep in the horror. Cause of death: blunt force trauma to the head, followed by asphyxiation. Time of death estimated between 9:30 and 11 p.m. There were defensive wounds on her forearms. She fought. There was trace biological material beneath her fingernails. Investigators collected it carefully, sealing it in sterile envelopes, marking it for DNA analysis. In 2001, DNA testing was slower, less precise, expensive. Samples were sent to the state lab. Weeks passed, then months. The town held candlelight vigils. The high school gym filled with mourners wearing Emily's jersey number, 17, written in black marker on white shirts. Daniel Reeves stood at the front during one vigil, arm around the Harper family, eyes red, voice steady as he spoke about community strength. No one questioned him. Why would they? The lab results came back inconclusive. The DNA sample was degraded, mixed, insufficient for a clear match in the national database. Detectives interviewed dozens of residents. They followed leads that dissolved under scrutiny: a drifter seen near the highway, a former boyfriend with a temper, a truck spotted driving fast that night. Each theory flared briefly, then collapsed. Daniel Reeves sat through 2 formal interviews. He cooperated fully, provided alibi details, claimed he went home after leaving the pharmacy, watched a late-night sports recap, called his sister at 10:15 p.m. Phone records confirmed the call. His wife corroborated his presence. There was no physical evidence tying him to the creek. The navy fiber could have come from anyone. And so the case cooled. Years passed. Emily's photograph remained pinned to the corkboard in the sheriff's office, edges curling, colors fading. Detectives retired. Files were boxed, labeled, stored. The phrase "unsolved homicide" hardened into something permanent. For the Harper family, permanence meant birthdays without candles, graduations without applause, an empty seat at every Thanksgiving table. For Ashford, it meant a subtle shift in the air. Parents began driving their teenagers to practice instead of letting them walk. Porch lights stayed on longer. But eventually, even fear settles into routine. New scandals replaced old grief. Daniel Reeves continued coaching, continued mentoring, became athletic director by 2010. Awarded Citizen of the Year in 2013 for his work with at-risk youth. The applause was loud, the trust unshaken. Then came the advancement no one in 2001 could have predicted. Genetic technology leapt forward. By 2018, cold case units across the country were reopening files once thought hopeless, re-examining old evidence with new tools. In Ashford, a newly elected sheriff, Maria Collins, reviewed every unsolved homicide within her jurisdiction. Emily Harper's case file landed on her desk like a weight from the past. She read it in one sitting, studied the photographs, the autopsy, the lab notes mentioning partial male DNA profile, insufficient for Cody's match. That phrase caught her attention. Insufficient then. But now? She ordered the evidence retrieved from storage. The envelopes containing fingernail scrapings were intact, preserved in climate-controlled conditions. A state-of-the-art lab reprocessed the material using enhanced amplification techniques unavailable in 2001. The result was faint but measurable, a more complete male DNA profile. Not enough for a direct database hit, but enough for something else. Investigators turned to investigative genetic genealogy, a controversial but increasingly successful method that compares crime scene DNA to public ancestry databases, identifying distant relatives and building family trees outward. It was painstaking work. Weeks of cross-referencing. Names layered upon names. Cousins. Great-uncles. Branches spreading across counties. Slowly, a cluster began to form around one extended family rooted right there in Ashford. One surname kept resurfacing. Reeves. Detectives proceeded cautiously. Genetic similarity does not equal guilt. They mapped the family tree, narrowing possibilities by age, location, and proximity in 2001. 3 potential male relatives fit the biological profile and timeline. One lived across the country and had no documented presence in Ashford that year. Another was 12 years old in 2001. The third was 32 at the time. Assistant basketball coach. Daniel Reeves. The revelation was not yet proof. They needed a direct sample. But collecting DNA from a respected community leader required strategy. Surveillance began quietly. Detectives observed his routines. Morning jog. Coffee at Main Street Diner. Evening practice sessions. One afternoon, after a school board meeting, Reeves discarded a plastic water bottle into a public trash bin outside the municipal building. An investigator retrieved it minutes later, gloved hands steady, sealing it in evidence packaging. The lab comparison took less than a week. Match. The probability ratio exceeded 1 in several trillion. The DNA under Emily Harper's fingernails belonged to Daniel Reeves. The arrest warrant was signed on a gray Tuesday morning. When deputies arrived at the high school gym, practice was underway. Sneakers squeaked on polished wood. Reeves was demonstrating defensive positioning to a circle of teenagers who looked up in confusion as uniformed officers approached mid-court. The gym fell silent except for the echo of bouncing basketballs rolling unattended across the floor. Students watched as their mentor, their coach, was informed of the charge. First-degree murder. His expression shifted, surprise, then anger, then something unreadable. He denied everything, called it impossible, claimed contamination, conspiracy. But handcuffs clicked closed around wrists that had once lifted trophies in celebration. The news detonated through Ashford faster than it had in 2001. Trusted local figure arrested in cold case. DNA breakthrough. Community shocked. Parents gathered in parking lots, whispering in disbelief. Former players scoured memories for signs they might have missed. The Harper family stood before cameras that evening, grief resurrected, voices trembling as they described a mix of vindication and devastation. Justice, perhaps, but at a cost measured in decades. Yet even as prosecutors prepared for trial, questions lingered like shadows. If Reeves was responsible, how had he concealed it so effectively for 20 years? Why that night? Why Emily? And how many secrets had been hidden beneath the polished surface of small-town trust? Investigators revisited old interviews, searching for overlooked inconsistencies. They re-examined alibi details. That 10:15 p.m. phone call to his sister, brief, only 2 minutes. Could it have been staged? Could he have driven to the creek and back in the window between 8:42 and 10:15? The distance was short. The timeline, tight but plausible. Forensic analysts reassessed fiber evidence. The navy strand found on the fence matched the material composition of Ashford High's 2001 coaching jackets. Records showed Reeves had been issued one that season. In living rooms across town, people replayed memories, scrutinizing harmless interactions that now felt sinister. The church pew, where he had prayed beside grieving parents. The scholarship fund he helped organize in Emily's name. The speeches about mentorship and moral responsibility. The betrayal cut deeper than the crime itself. Trust, once fractured, does not mend cleanly. And still, beneath the legal motions and televised hearings, the creek remained. Miller's Creek, flowing past rusted fence posts and bending reeds, indifferent to headlines. For 20 years it had carried the weight of an unanswered question. Now, with a DNA profile and a man in custody, the question seemed closer to resolution. But resolution is not the same as closure. Because in Ashford, every siren that echoes down Main Street carries an undertone of memory. Every foggy October morning recalls the shape in the grass. The case that refused to die. The secret that lived in plain sight. And as the trial looms, as evidence is laid bare and reputations crumble, the town braces for a final reckoning, knowing that whatever the verdict, the innocence it once claimed was lost the moment a 17-year-old girl failed to come home. And the silence that followed lasted far longer than anyone ever imagined. The indictment dropped like a thunderclap, but the real shock came in the quiet that followed. Ashford stopped pretending. Conversations no longer danced around the word murder. It was spoken plainly now, in grocery store aisles, at gas pumps, in the echoing halls of the high school where Daniel Reeves had once been untouchable. The mugshot hit the evening news at 6:03 p.m., his familiar face flattened under harsh booking lights, eyes drained of warmth, jaw clenched as if defiance alone could bend reality. The caption beneath it burned, 2001 cold case arrest, DNA match confirmed. For 20 years, Emily Harper's name had floated like a ghost through town. Now it slammed back into the present with force. Inside the county jail, Reeves maintained his composure. He requested an attorney immediately. He declined to answer further questions. But detectives were no longer chasing shadows. They had numbers, probabilities, a genetic fingerprint that did not fade with time. Sheriff Maria Collins stood before reporters the next morning, her voice steady, measured, refusing theatrics. She described the technological leap that resurrected a dead file. Enhanced STR analysis. Genealogical mapping. Familial triangulation. Words that sounded clinical, almost sterile, yet behind them was a revelation that tore through 2 decades of silence. The male DNA recovered from beneath Emily's fingernails in 2001 matched Daniel Reeves to a statistical certainty beyond reasonable doubt. The science had spoken where witnesses had faltered. Still, the defense wasted no time constructing doubt. They argued contamination, mishandling of evidence, a compromised chain of custody after years in storage. They painted genealogical databases as unreliable, invasive, speculative. They questioned the original collection of the sample. Was it truly preserved correctly? Could transferred DNA have occurred during handling? The courtroom had not yet convened, but the battle lines were already visible. Investigators, meanwhile, reopened every drawer of the past. They reassembled the timeline minute by minute. Surveillance footage from the pharmacy was reprocessed using modern enhancement software. Grain sharpened, shadows clarified. In one frame, Emily turns toward Reeves in the parking lot. His posture is casual. But there, just barely, his hand lingers on the edge of her driver's door a second longer than necessary. A detail meaningless in 2001, now dissected frame by frame. Detectives track down archived phone logs. The 10:15 p.m. call to his sister lasted 2 minutes and 11 seconds. She would later testify that nothing seemed unusual. He mentioned a game strategy. Asked about her kids. Routine conversation. But cell tower data revealed something overlooked at the time. The ping did not originate from his home address. It bounced off a tower closer to the county road that led toward Miller's Creek. That detail cracked something open. In 2001, triangulation technology was crude. Location margins span miles. But with modern reconstruction techniques, analysts overlaid historic tower coverage maps with call data. The result narrowed his position within a 1-mile radius of the creek at 10:15 p.m. The defense insisted the margin of error remained too broad. Prosecutors countered that combined with the DNA match, the geographic proximity tightened the noose. As news of the tower analysis leaked, Ashford reeled again. The idea that he might have staged that call, dialed his sister while parked in darkness near the crime scene, sent a chill deeper than the original arrest. It suggested calculation, forethought, a performance rehearsed under pressure. Former students began speaking out, cautiously at first. A graduate from the class of 2004 described how Reeves often offered private rides home after late practices. Another recalled a hand placed too low on her back during team photos. None of it had seemed criminal then. Uncomfortable, maybe. But in a town that prized respect for authority, discomfort rarely blossomed into accusation. Now those memories felt radioactive. Detectives logged each statement, searching for patterns. No additional charges emerged immediately, but the portrait of a trusted mentor was fracturing into something unrecognizable. The Harper family moved carefully through the renewed storm. Emily's mother, Carol, had preserved her daughter's bedroom like a shrine, posters frozen in time, a stack of college brochures still fanned across a desk. When reporters asked whether the arrest brought closure, her answer cut through the noise. Closure would mean she walks through that door, she said quietly. This is not closure. This is confirmation. Confirmation that the man who stood beside them at vigils, who bowed his head in prayer, who hugged them in public displays of solidarity, may have been the one who stole their child. Prosecutors built their case methodically. They re-examined the navy fiber found on the barbed wire. Advances in textile forensics allowed for more precise composition comparison. The fiber's polymer blend and dye signature matched the specific batch used in Ashford high coaching jackets issued in fall 2001. Records indicated only 4 were distributed that season. 3 were accounted for and tested. None matched the microscopic wear pattern found on the recovered strand. Reeves claimed he had lost his original jacket years ago during a move. Convenient absence. Prosecutors suggested otherwise, that the torn fiber was a silent witness, snagged during a struggle as Emily fought back against the fence line. And then there was the vehicle data. Reeves drove a dark blue pickup truck in 2001. Photographs from the era showed distinct aftermarket tires with a rare tread pattern. Detectives unearthed archived crime scene photos of partial tire impressions near Miller's Creek. In 2001, the prints were too degraded for definitive comparison. Now, digital enhancement and pattern overlay techniques revealed striking similarities between the archived impressions and the tread design from Reeves's old truck model. Not absolute proof, but converging evidence. Inside the jail, Reeves requested protective custody. He remained outwardly composed during brief court appearances, dressed in standard-issue orange, eyes scanning the gallery where familiar faces once filled basketball bleachers in his honor. Now those same faces stared back with confusion, betrayal, or hardened disbelief. Some still supported him. A small but vocal group insisted the DNA science was flawed, that a man who had dedicated his life to youth mentorship could not be capable of such brutality. They organized online campaigns, raised funds for his legal defense. In small towns, loyalty does not evaporate easily. But loyalty could not erase the image of Miller's Creek. Crime scene analysts reconstructed the probable sequence. Emily likely arrived at the turnout voluntarily, perhaps believing she was meeting someone she trusted. There were no signs of forced entry in her car. No broken nails inside the vehicle. The struggle appeared to have occurred near the fence line, where soil disturbance indicated abrupt movement. She fought. The defensive wounds confirmed it. Under her fingernails, she captured skin cells that would sleep for 17 years before waking up to accuse. As pretrial hearings unfolded, the judge ruled the genealogical DNA method admissible, citing precedent from other jurisdictions. The defense protested, warning of privacy violations and speculative science. The courtroom became a battleground not just over guilt, but over the evolution of forensic investigation itself. Cold cases across the country were watching. If the evidence held, it would reinforce a growing reality. Time no longer guaranteed immunity. Ashford's high school removed Reeves's name from the athletic director's office door. His awards disappeared from display cases overnight. Students whispered in corridors once dominated by his presence. The gym floor where he had been arrested felt different now, the polished wood reflecting not pride but unease. Every banner hanging from the rafters seemed to sway with accusation. Yet beneath the procedural grind, one question pulsed relentlessly. Why? Prosecutors hinted at a theory of escalating boundary violations, of a man who cultivated admiration and used it as cover. They suggested Emily may have confided something to a friend, something that threatened exposure. But no diary entry, no recovered message definitively established motive. The absence of a clear why kept the wound raw. In crimes of intimacy and trust, motive often hides behind ordinary interactions. As winter settled over Ashford, frost edging the banks of Miller's Creek, the town found itself suspended between past and reckoning. 20 years ago, fear arrived suddenly and lingered without explanation. Now explanation seemed within reach, but it brought no comfort. The image of Reeves in handcuffs had replaced the old uncertainty with something heavier. The realization that evil does not always announce itself. Sometimes it coaches your children. Sometimes it prays beside you. Sometimes it waits, patient and unseen, trusting that time will bury its secrets. But time had failed him. Science had circled back. And as the trial date approached, with jurors soon to be selected from a community both victimized and divided, Ashford braced for testimony that would drag every buried detail into open court. Because once evidence is spoken aloud, once timelines are projected onto courtroom screens and DNA charts displayed under fluorescent light, there is no returning to ignorance. The creek still flows. The fog still rolls in at dawn. But the silence that once protected a killer has fractured, and in its place rises a truth sharpened by years of waiting, a truth that refuses to sleep any longer. Jury selection began under a sky the color of wet concrete, the courthouse steps lined with satellite trucks and camera crews who had transformed Ashford's quiet square into a national spectacle. Inside, potential jurors filed past the wooden doors with stiff shoulders and lowered eyes, aware that whatever they decided would echo far beyond their own lives. This was no longer just a local tragedy. This was a test of memory, of science, of trust fractured and reassembled under fluorescent courtroom lights. Daniel Reeves entered wearing a dark suit provided by his attorney, the county's most experienced defense lawyer, Thomas Hale, a man known for dismantling cases with surgical calm. Reeves looked thinner than in his coaching days. The confidence that once radiated from him now felt restrained, carefully managed. He avoided eye contact with the Harper family seated in the front row. Emily's mother clutched a folded tissue in her lap, her knuckles white, her gaze unwavering. Opening statements came fast and sharp. The prosecution did not begin with rage. They began with time. October 12, 2001. 8:42 p.m. pharmacy parking lot. 9:30 p.m. estimated time of assault. 10:15 p.m. cell tower ping near Miller's Creek. Under Emily Harper's fingernails, the voice of science waiting patiently for technology to catch up. The jurors listened as the lead prosecutor described DNA not as theory, but as identity itself. A genetic signature carried in every cell, impossible to fabricate, impossible to misplace, without explanation. Then the defense stood. Thomas Hale walked slowly before the jury box and spoke of doubt. Not dramatic doubt. Reasonable doubt. He questioned the chain of custody stretching back 2 decades. He reminded jurors that the DNA sample had been partial, degraded, enhanced through modern amplification, a process he described as reconstructive, implying interpretation rather than certainty. He emphasized that genealogical mapping led investigators to Reeves only after narrowing through distant relatives. "This is a story built backward," Hale said quietly. "They found a family name, and from that moment forward, they stopped looking anywhere else." The battle was set. The first witnesses were procedural, officers who responded to the scene in 2001. They described the fog, the dew-soaked grass, the stillness broken only by radio static. Crime scene photographs filled courtroom monitors. The fence line, the tire impressions, the fabric fiber clinging to barbed wire. Jurors leaned forward as the medical examiner, now retired but sharp in recollection, detailed blunt force trauma to the skull and the bruising consistent with manual asphyxiation. Emily had fought. She had clawed at her attacker's skin with enough force to capture microscopic fragments that would outlive her. Then came the forensic analysts, old and new. The original 2001 lab technician testified first, explaining the limitations of early DNA profiling. She acknowledged that the initial sample was too weak for a Cody's hit but insisted it was preserved under strict protocol. The evidence envelopes were shown to the jury, seals intact, signatures dated. The chain of custody logs were meticulous. The defense pressed her on potential contamination. Could another handler's skin cells have transferred? She conceded that contamination is always a theoretical risk, but maintained there was no indication of such an event in this case. The modern lab director followed, speaking with clinical precision. She explained how enhanced PCR amplification allowed previously unreadable alleles to be identified. She presented the comparison charts, peaks and markers aligning between the crime scene sample and the discarded water bottle recovered from Reeves. The probability of a coincidental match, 1 in 6.8 trillion. The number hung in the air like a verdict waiting to be spoken. Hale did not flinch. On cross-examination, he dissected the methodology. He questioned whether the amplification process could exaggerate minor alleles. He asked whether secondary transfer, DNA passed from one surface to another indirectly, could explain the presence under Emily's fingernails. The lab director answered steadily. Secondary transfer under fingernails in quantities sufficient to produce this profile would require unlikely conditions, particularly during a violent struggle documented by defensive wounds. Her tone did not rise. It did not need to. Midweek, the prosecution introduced the cell tower reconstruction analysis. A telecommunications expert projected coverage maps onto a screen. In 2001, Reeves's phone connected to a tower positioned along County Road 8, within a narrowed radius that included Miller's Creek. The defense countered that rural towers can service wide areas, that signal bounce can distort location. The expert acknowledged margins of error but emphasized convergence. The ping placed Reeves significantly closer to the creek than to his stated home address at 10:15 p.m. But it was not science alone that shifted the atmosphere. It was memory. A former student, now in her 30s, took the stand. Her voice trembled at first. She described late practices in the early 2000s. The extra attention Reeves paid to certain girls. The rides offered home. The lingering touches disguised as encouragement. She did not accuse him of assault. She did not claim he harmed her physically. But she described discomfort she could not articulate at 17. The defense objected, prejudicial, irrelevant to the charge. The judge allowed limited testimony, instructing jurors to consider it only for context of relationship patterns, not as evidence of guilt in Emily's death. Each word chipped away at the polished image Reeves had cultivated. The Harper family listened without blinking. Then came the fiber analyst. Using high-resolution microscopy, she explained the polymer blend unique to the 2001 Ashford high-coaching jackets. The navy strand recovered from the fence shared identical dye composition and manufacturing batch characteristics. 3 of the 4 issued jackets were tested and excluded. Reeves's jacket, reportedly lost, was never recovered. The defense suggested the fiber could have come from any similar garment manufactured that year. The analyst responded that while similar blends existed, the dye signature and microabrasion pattern indicated contact consistent with tearing during forceful movement. And still, Reeves sat motionless. Outside the courthouse, the town was splitting along invisible fault lines. Some residents left supportive notes on the Harper family's mailbox. Others wore blue ribbons in solidarity with Reeves, insisting he was a victim of overreach. Social media flared with arguments over forensic science and loyalty. The phrase cold case justice trended briefly in state headlines. Ashford was no longer anonymous. By the second week, prosecutors approached motive carefully. They introduced witness testimony suggesting Emily had grown distant from Reeves in the weeks before her death. A friend testified that Emily once mentioned feeling uncomfortable after a conversation with him in the school hallway. No specifics. Just unease. The defense objected again. Speculation. Hearsay. The judge permitted limited recounting under existing evidentiary rules. The prosecution's theory crystallized. Emily may have resisted advances or threatened to speak. Reeves, facing exposure that would destroy his reputation, lured her to the turnout under false pretenses. An argument escalated. Violence followed. The phone call to his sister, placed near the creek, was an alibi in motion. The defense countered with an alternate narrative. They suggested an unknown assailant, perhaps the drifter initially investigated in 2001. They emphasized that no eyewitness placed Reeves at the creek that night. They underscored the absence of his fingerprints in Emily's car. They reminded jurors that grief can distort perception and that retrospective suspicion can be fueled by community shock. Yet the DNA remained. On the 12th day of trial, the prosecution rested. The courtroom felt charged, like air before a storm. Hail rose for the defense case, calling character witnesses who described Reeves as compassionate, dedicated, incapable of violence. A former pastor testified to his years of volunteer service. A colleague described his mentorship of troubled teens. Each account painted a portrait starkly at odds with the forensic narrative. The defense did not put Reeves on the stand, a strategic decision that drew quiet speculation but avoided cross-examination risk. Closing arguments loomed. Ashford held its breath. In living rooms across town, residents replayed testimony in whispered debate. The creek, now edged with early spring thaw, flowed as it had in 2001, indifferent to legal strategy. But in the courthouse, 12 jurors prepared to weigh decades of silence against a string of scientific certainties. The question no longer centered on whether the case had been reopened. It centered on whether the evidence, old and new, erased every reasonable doubt. Because once the jury door closed, once deliberations began behind that sealed room, the town would move from accusation to judgment. And judgment, unlike suspicion, is final. The echo of sneakers on the high school gym floor had long faded. The vigils were distant memories. But the fight that began at a fence line in fog had reached its reckoning under oath and cross-examination. 20 years collapsed into 12 days of testimony. Science stood beside memory. Trust stood trial alongside a man once shielded by it. And as the jury prepared to decide whether Daniel Reeves was the killer who had hidden in plain sight for 2 decades, Ashford understood one thing with painful clarity. Whatever the verdict, the town that existed before October 2001 was gone forever, replaced by a reality where secrets endure. where time is no longer a guarantee of escape, and where even the most familiar face can conceal a darkness patient enough to wait 20 years to be named. Closing arguments began in a courtroom so quiet it felt sealed off from the rest of the world. Outside, traffic moved along Main Street. Coffee machines hissed in the diner across the square. Students changed classes under fluorescent lights. But inside that room, time compressed into something suffocating. 12 jurors sat rigid, notebooks filled, eyes fixed forward as the prosecution delivered its final strike. They did not shout. They did not dramatize. They reconstructed. October 12, 2001. Pharmacy parking lot. 8:42 p.m. Emily Harper smiling, unaware. Daniel Reeves standing close enough to touch her car door. 9:30 p.m. Along the dark curve of County Road 8, near Miller's Creek, a location no teenager would randomly choose on a school night. Defensive wounds. Blunt force trauma. Skin under fingernails. DNA preserved like a time capsule. 10:15 p.m. A phone call placed not from home, but from the shadow of a rural cell tower within range of the crime scene. A navy fiber torn against barbed wire. A jacket that vanished. A truck with tires matching impressions left in soft creekside mud. 20 years of quiet. And then science catching up. The prosecutor stepped closer to the jury box. He trusted that time would protect him, she said evenly. He trusted that technology would never reach backward. He trusted that this community would never imagine someone like him capable of something like this. She paused. But Emily Harper fought back, and she left us the truth. When the defense rose, the tone shifted, but the intensity did not. Thomas Hale spoke of the weight of accusation, of how modern tools can create the illusion of certainty. He reminded jurors that partial DNA enhanced 2 decades later is not the same as fresh evidence. He emphasized that no eyewitness saw Reeves at the creek, that no confession existed, that motive remained speculative. You are not here to repair grief, he said softly. You are here to decide whether the state has eliminated every reasonable doubt. Suspicion, even powerful suspicion, is not proof. He let the word doubt linger. The judge instructed the jury carefully: presumption of innocence, burden of proof, evaluation of forensic testimony, the limits of character evidence. Then the jurors stood, filed into the deliberation room, and the door closed with a sound that echoed deeper than anyone expected. Ashford entered a different kind of silence. The Harper family remained seated long after the jury disappeared. Daniel Reeves leaned toward his attorney, whispering something inaudible. Outside, cameras waited for any flicker of movement. News anchors rehearsed phrases: historic verdict, cold case justice, community divided. But inside the deliberation room, the narrative fractured into pieces. 12 strangers began reconstructing 20 years. The first vote was taken within an hour. It was not unanimous. The holdout did not speak immediately. Jurors reviewed DNA charts again. They requested transcripts of the telecommunications expert's testimony. They asked to re-examine the fiber analysis slides. They debated the probability ratio, 1 in 6.8 trillion. They discussed secondary transfer. They replayed the timeline on a whiteboard. 8:42 p.m. pharmacy. 9:30 to 11 o'clock estimated time of death. 10:15 p.m. cell tower ping. Could someone else have committed the assault within that window? Could Reeves have arrived coincidentally later? Or was coincidence a refuge for disbelief? Hours passed. Evening settled. The courthouse lights glowed against darkening sky. Reporters ordered takeout. Families refreshed news feeds compulsively. Inside the jury room, voices sharpened. One juror questioned the fiber evidence. Without the jacket itself, could they truly anchor that strand to Reeves? Another countered that fibers alone would not convict, but fibers plus DNA plus cell data formed a convergence, too precise to ignore. The holdout focused on contamination risk. 20 years is a long time. Evidence degrades. Protocols evolve. Could enhancement distort? The lab director's calm explanation resurfaced in memory. Alleles aligned. Peaks matched. The statistical improbability, defied coincidence. They took a second vote near midnight. The count shifted. By morning, exhaustion blurred the edges of doubt. Jurors revisited the autopsy photographs, the defensive wounds, the torn nails. One juror whispered what others had been circling. If the DNA under her fingernails was not his, then whose was it? No alternate suspect had ever produced a competing profile. The defense offered no name, no rival genetic match, only the suggestion of possibility. But possibility without substance began to thin under scrutiny. Late the next afternoon, the bailiff knocked softly on the deliberation room door. A verdict had been reached. The courtroom filled in minutes. The Harper family gripped hands so tightly their knuckles blanched. Reeves stared straight ahead, jaw set, expression carved from stone. The foreperson stood, voice steady but pale. On the charge of first-degree murder. Guilty. The word detonated. Carol Harper exhaled a sound that was not quite a sob and not quite relief. It was something in between, the release of a breath held for 20 years. Reeves's shoulders dropped almost imperceptibly. His attorney placed a hand on his arm, already whispering about appeals, about post-conviction motions, about forensic challenges. But the verdict had landed. Outside, the headlines spread instantly. Small Town 2001 cold case. Guilty verdict after DNA breakthrough. Ashford was no longer divided by uncertainty. It was divided by reaction. Some wept openly on courthouse steps. Others shook their heads in disbelief. A small cluster of supporters insisted the fight was not over, that science can err, that appeals courts exist for a reason. But the legal truth had been spoken in a room of 12 citizens who had weighed doubt against data and chosen conviction. Sentencing came weeks later. The courtroom, less crowded but no less tense, listened as victim impact statements were delivered. Emily's father spoke of empty milestones, graduations, weddings, grandchildren who would never exist. He described the ache of watching Reeves stand beside them at vigils, offering comfort he did not deserve. "You stole more than her life," he said, voice breaking. "You stole our trust." When given the opportunity to speak, Daniel Reeves rose slowly. For the first time since his arrest, his composure fractured. He maintained his innocence, voice trembling with restrained anger. He claimed the system had failed him, that technology had created a narrative impossible to escape. He did not apologize to the Harper family. He did not express sorrow for Emily's death. He simply insisted he was not the man they believed him to be. The judge imposed life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Gavel down. Case closed, at least in the language of the court. But closure in Ashford did not arrive cleanly. It arrived tangled with memory. The high school gym removed championship banners from the years Reeves coached, replacing them with blank space that felt louder than any decoration. The creek remained, water gliding past reeds as if unaware of verdicts. Students who had once admired him recalibrated their pasts, wondering which moments were real and which were manipulation. The Harper family visited Emily's grave the evening after sentencing. The sky was clear, stars sharp against blackness. Carol placed her hand against the cool stone and whispered that the fight was over. Yet even in that moment, the word over felt fragile. Because 20 years of unanswered questions do not dissolve with a single pronouncement of guilt. They linger in the spaces between memory and fact. Appeals would come. Motions would be filed. Experts would argue over technicalities in higher courts. The defense promised as much before cameras, vowing to challenge the admissibility of genealogical methods. The story would not vanish quietly. Cold cases rarely do. But something irreversible had occurred. Time had not buried the truth. It had preserved it. In 2001, a small town believed its safety was unquestionable. In 2021, that belief lay shattered, replaced by a harsher awareness that evil can blend seamlessly into everyday life, that trust can be weaponized, that patience is sometimes the only ally justice has. The phrase cold case no longer meant forgotten. It meant waiting. And as Ashford returned to its routines, porch lights flickering on at dusk, football games resuming under stadium glare, there remained an undercurrent beneath the ordinary rhythm. A recognition that silence is not the same as innocence. That secrets may endure for years, even decades, but they do not vanish. They wait in sealed envelopes, in microscopic fragments of skin, in fibers caught on rusted wire. They wait for someone to look again. And in the end, it was not a confession or a witness that spoke loudest. It was a trace left in desperation by a 17-year-old girl who refused to go quietly. A fragment of resistance preserved against time. A voice carried not by memory, but by science. Miller's Creek still flows. Fog still rolls in at dawn. But Ashford no longer believes in untouched innocence. It believes in reckoning. The verdict should have ended it. In legal language, it did. Case adjudicated. Sentence imposed. Files stamped and archived again, this time not as unsolved but resolved. Yet in Ashford, resolution felt less like a door closing and more like another one creaking open. Within days of sentencing, the first appeal notice was filed. Thomas Hale stood before reporters outside the courthouse, voice measured, tie perfectly straight, promising to challenge the admissibility of genealogical DNA tracing. He called it a frontier science operating ahead of constitutional clarity. He argued that privacy rights had been stretched, that the use of public ancestry databases without explicit consent created a dangerous precedent. His words were calm, precise, aimed beyond Ashford, aimed at higher courts where legal technicalities carry more weight than emotional testimony. Inside their home, the Harper family watched the broadcast in silence. For them, the fight felt endless. 20 years of waiting. Months of trial. A verdict that brought relief wrapped in exhaustion. And now the possibility that everything could be reopened again, not the facts, not the loss, but the certainty. But while legal documents moved quietly through appellate channels, something else began to stir inside the town. Tips. The sheriff's office hotline, dormant after sentencing, flickered back to life. A woman in her 40s called late one evening, voice shaking, describing a memory from 2002, an incident after a basketball fundraiser when Reeves insisted on driving her home despite her protests. Nothing criminal occurred, she said. But the route he took detoured briefly toward County Road 8 before circling back. She remembered feeling confused at the time, not frightened enough to report it. Now, with hindsight, the detour felt deliberate. Another former student emailed investigators, recounting how Reeves once warned her to be careful what you say about people in this town. She could not remember the context. It might have been harmless, or it might not have been. Detectives logged every statement. None rose to the level of prosecutable offense. But patterns were forming, subtle, unnerving, consistent with grooming behavior. A cultivated image of mentorship. Boundary testing disguised as concern. The prosecution's theory, once limited to courtroom argument, was now echoed in lived experiences. Ashford high-commissioned an independent review of past conduct complaints. Archived personnel files were reopened. No formal disciplinary actions existed. No written warnings. If whispers had circulated in the early 2000s, they had dissolved before reaching paper. The deeper investigators looked, the clearer a possibility emerged. Emily Harper may not have been a spontaneous victim. She may have been the first who resisted in a way that threatened exposure. That theory ignited a new kind of unease. Reporters returned, no longer focused solely on the conviction but on institutional oversight. How does a trusted local figure operate unchecked for years? How do discomforts remain unvoiced? Ashford School Board held public forums. Parents demanded transparency. Former students filled microphones with memories they once dismissed. Some described nothing more than awkward interactions. Others spoke of manipulative favoritism. None described violence. But each story added weight to a portrait that had once been flawless. Meanwhile, in a state prison 3 hours away, Daniel Reeves adjusted to a different reality. Gone were the polished gym floors and Friday night lights. In their place, concrete walls, metal bunks, regimented routine. He kept mostly to himself, according to corrections officers. He spent hours in the law library, studying appellate procedure. He wrote letters to his attorney, to a handful of supporters, to family members who remained loyal. In those letters, he maintained his innocence with unwavering consistency. He described the trial as a narrative built on coincidence and amplified science. He called the DNA evidence contextless. He framed himself as the victim of technological overreach. But technology does not sleep. Months after the verdict, the state crime lab reran the preserved DNA sample as part of a quality assurance review. The profile remained stable. The alleles aligned. No contamination flags. The integrity held. Prosecutors quietly archived the confirmation, anticipating appellate scrutiny. Then came the unexpected twist. A private forensic consultant hired by the defense filed a motion requesting independent reanalysis of the fingernail scrapings using a different laboratory. The request was granted under standard post-conviction review. The envelopes were unsealed once more, this time under even stricter supervision. The independent lab confirmed the primary male DNA profile matched Reeves. But it also detected trace secondary DNA from an unidentified contributor, too weak for full profiling but present nonetheless. The defense seized upon it instantly. They argued that the presence of a secondary contributor suggested the possibility of another individual at the scene. They framed it as reasonable doubt resurrected. News outlets ran headlines, "New DNA detail surfaces in cold case appeal." Social media reignited. Supporters of Reeves pointed to the trace profile as evidence of alternative scenarios. Skeptics countered that mixed DNA is common in physical altercations and does not negate the dominant match. For the Harper family, the development reopened wounds, not yet scarred. Sheriff Collins addressed the new findings directly in a press conference. She explained that secondary DNA could result from prior contact, Emily's everyday interactions, incidental transfer. The quantity was minimal, not indicative of primary struggle. The dominant profile under her fingernails belongs to Daniel Reeves, she said firmly. That has not changed. But doubt, once reintroduced into public conversation, spreads quickly. Appellate hearings began nearly a year after sentencing.
The courtroom was smaller this time.
No emotional testimony. No autopsy photographs. Just legal arguments over admissibility and procedure. Defense counsel challenged the use of genealogical databases without a warrant specific to individual contributors. They argued that investigators built their suspect list through privacy loopholes. The prosecution responded that users voluntarily uploaded genetic information to public platforms with clear opt-in policies permitting law enforcement comparison. The appellate judges listened, asked pointed questions, reserved judgment. Ashford watched again. And beneath the legal chess match, a quieter reckoning unfolded. Emily Harper's case had become more than a murder trial. It had become a cautionary tale about time, about perception, about how easily trust can shield harm. School districts across the region implemented stricter reporting protocols. Youth mentorship programs added oversight layers. Background checks expanded. The town's innocence had been replaced by vigilance. Yet vigilance carries its own cost. Teachers found themselves scrutinized for benign gestures. Coaches hesitated before offering extra help. The line between caution and suspicion blurred. Ashford wrestled with how to protect its children without poisoning its community with fear. On the 20th anniversary of Emily's death, a memorial bench was installed near the entrance to Miller's Creek Park. The inscription was simple, "In memory of Emily Harper. May truth endure." Residents gathered at dusk, candles flickering against autumn wind. The creek flowed quietly beside them, unchanged in appearance, altered forever in meaning. Carol Harper spoke briefly. She did not mention the appeal. She did not mention secondary DNA or legal arguments. She spoke about her daughter's laugh, about the way Emily used to braid her hair before school, about the fight she put up that night, not metaphorical but literal. "She left us the proof," Carol said. She did not disappear quietly. The words settled over the crowd like a vow. Weeks later, the appellate court issued its ruling. The conviction stood. The judges affirmed that the genealogical investigative method, when used in conjunction with confirmatory direct DNA sampling, did not violate constitutional protections in this case. They acknowledged evolving legal landscapes, but concluded that the evidence was lawfully obtained and properly admitted. Daniel Reeves would remain in prison. The headline hit Ashford with less shock this time, more steadiness. The town did not erupt. It absorbed. The legal storm that followed the verdict had passed, leaving behind something quieter but more enduring, a recognition that justice can be delayed without being denied. But even now, years after the foggy morning at Miller's Creek, certain questions refuse to dissolve entirely. Why that night? What precise words were exchanged in the darkness? What flicker of panic or rage turned trust into violence? Those answers died with the only two people who truly knew. And so the case remains solved, but not simplified. In Ashford, when fog drifts low over the fields and headlights cut through the gray, there is a collective memory that surfaces unbidden. A reminder that evil does not always arrive as a stranger. Sometimes it grows familiar first. Sometimes it earns applause. Sometimes it waits for time to dull suspicion. But time, in the end, became the very thing that exposed it. The creek keeps moving. The bench remains. The file is closed. Yet the story endures. Not as a cold case anymore, but as proof that even the smallest fragment of resistance can outlast decades of silence. Prison has a way of compressing a man's identity down to essentials. No titles. No applause. No gymnasium echoing with approval. Just a number stitched onto fabric and a steel door that shuts the same way every night. Daniel Reeves learned the rhythm quickly. Count at dawn, count at dusk, controlled movement, measured speech. The world beyond razor wire kept arguing about science and precedent. Inside, routine swallowed argument whole. But even in confinement, his name would not settle. True crime podcasts picked up the story. National outlets framed it as a landmark genealogical breakthrough. Law journals dissected the appellate ruling, debating privacy boundaries and evolving forensic standards. Universities invited Sheriff Maria Collins to speak about cold case revitalization. Ashford, once a quiet on a county map, became shorthand in criminal justice circles for patients rewarded. And still, beneath the polished summaries, the emotional residue lingered. The Harper family tried to rebuild something resembling normalcy. They sold the house where Emily had grown up. The bedroom shrine was dismantled piece by careful piece. Posters folded. College brochures boxed. The air inside those walls had grown too heavy with pause time. Moving did not erase grief, but it altered its shape. It gave it different corners to inhabit. Meanwhile, prison interviews began. A regional journalist secured limited access to Reeves under strict supervision. The first interview aired in fragments, grainy footage, muted color, Reeves seated at a metal table beneath fluorescent hum. He spoke calmly, insisting on wrongful conviction. He questioned the reliability of amplified DNA, suggested that confirmation bias had infected investigators once his name surfaced through genealogical mapping. He never raised his voice. He never broke into visible anger. Instead, he leaned on composure, the same composure that once made him trustworthy. "I didn't kill Emily Harper," he said directly into the camera. "And someday that will be proven." The clip circulated rapidly. For some, it reopened doubt. For others, it reinforced manipulation, the steady tone, the absence of visible remorse, the careful language. The prosecution declined to comment publicly, citing finality of conviction. Sheriff Collins offered a brief statement. "The evidence speaks for itself." Yet evidence, while powerful, does not silence curiosity. An investigative reporter began re-examining the broader context of Ashford in 2001. He unearthed demographic data, economic shifts, subtle stressors beneath the town's surface at the turn of the millennium. Factories closing. Budget cuts in school programs. Cultural tension between growth and preservation. None of it directly linked to the crime, but all of it painted a backdrop more complex than nostalgia allowed. The idea of a perfectly innocent small town began to feel like a myth carefully maintained. He interviewed former classmates of Emily. One described how she had recently applied to colleges out of state, ambitious, eager to leave. Another remembered her arguing with someone on the phone days before her death, voice sharp, uncharacteristically tense. The identity of the caller was never established. Phone records from 2001 were incomplete, many logs long destroyed. The missing fragments became fertile ground for speculation. Could there have been more to the story than the courtroom revealed? The reporter filed a public records request for the full investigative file. Portions were redacted, but timelines, interview summaries, and forensic diagrams emerged in meticulous detail. Reading them felt like reopening a wound under sterile light. The struggle site was mapped precisely. Soil samples cataloged. Weather conditions recorded. 54 degrees Fahrenheit, humidity high, ground damp from earlier rainfall. The creek depth measured at 2 feet along the bank where the body was found. One notation stood out. An early 2001 interview with a passing motorist who reported seeing a pickup truck idling near County Road 8 around 9:40 p.m. The witness could not identify the driver. The description of the vehicle matched dozens in the region. In 2001, it had been logged and set aside as nonspecific. In hindsight, it felt heavier. The reporter published a long-form feature titled "The Night at Miller's Creek." It did not challenge the conviction. It reconstructed atmosphere, the darkness, the isolation, the decision points that might have led Emily from a lit parking lot to a remote turnout. It emphasized the absence of forced entry in her car. The implication remained consistent. She likely trusted the person she met. Trust remained the central fracture. Years passed. Appeals exhausted. Petitions denied. Reeves's supporters dwindled as the story aged. New scandals replaced old ones in public consciousness. Yet within Ashford, anniversaries still carried weight. On the 25th year since Emily's death, the high school unveiled a scholarship in her name funded by anonymous donors. The ceremony was quieter than the original vigils, less raw, but deeply intentional. A senior girl stood at the podium, voice steady, announcing her acceptance to a university far from Ashford. She spoke of courage, not abstract courage, but the courage to confront uncomfortable truths. Behind the applause, there was understanding. Cold cases do not simply reopen files, they reopen identity. Ashford had once defined itself by safety. After the verdict, it redefined itself by resilience. Mandatory reporting policies strengthened. Surveillance cameras upgraded. Counseling services expanded. The town did not crumble under revelation, it recalibrated. But in prison, recalibration looked different. Reeves aged. His hair thinned. His posture stiffened. He continued filing handwritten motions, citing emerging debates over genealogical privacy. Most were dismissed swiftly. He maintained correspondence with a small online community convinced of systemic overreach. In letters later obtained through public record, he described dreams of walking along a creek bank at dawn, insisting they were memories of innocence, not guilt. Whether those dreams were truth or self-preservation remained unknowable. And then, unexpectedly, a development emerged that briefly stirred the surface again. A distant relative of Reeves who had unknowingly contributed DNA to a public genealogy database gave a televised interview expressing discomfort. She had uploaded her genetic information to trace ancestry, not to assist law enforcement. She did not dispute the conviction. But she questioned whether her participation had indirectly led to a relative's imprisonment without her explicit awareness. The debate reignited nationally. Privacy advocates argued for stricter consent standards. Law enforcement agencies countered that violent crimes demand every available tool. Ashford watched the argument unfold with a weary familiarity. For them, the abstract discussion carried a name and a face: Emily Harper. Sheriff Collins, now nearing retirement, reflected in one of her final public addresses, "Technology changes. The law adapts. But at the center of every case is a victim who cannot speak. Our responsibility is to listen to the evidence they leave behind." Evidence had spoken. Yet even as years layered over the event, Miller's Creek remained unchanged in its physical form. Children still skipped stones along its edge. Couples walked dogs along the trail. The memorial bench weathered sun and rain, its inscription fading slightly with time, but still legible. May truth endure. Truth had endured, but clarity had limits. No recording captured the final conversation between Emily and her killer. No transcript detailed the exact moment trust fractured into violence. The motive, though argued convincingly in court, remained partially speculative. In that absence, imagination sometimes intruded, filling gaps with theories, with reconstructed dialogue, with scenes no one could verify. And that is the final echo of a once cold case. A verdict can declare guilt. Science can confirm identity. Appeals can affirm procedure. But certain questions remain suspended, not because justice failed, but because human moments, the precise flicker of anger, the instant of decision, are rarely preserved. Ashford lives with both certainty and mystery. It knows who. It understands how. It believes why. But it will never hear the full story from the only voice that could complete it. In the end, the case did not simply expose a trusted local figure. It exposed the fragile architecture of small-town faith, the belief that familiarity equals safety, that years of good deeds cancel hidden darkness. It proved that time can delay accountability, but cannot erase evidence sealed in a fragment of skin beneath a victim's nails. The creek continues its quiet current. The prison door continues its measured close. And in the space between those two realities, flowing water and locked steel, the legacy of a once cold case endures, not as spectacle, not as headline, but as a permanent reminder that truth, however delayed, carries a patience far greater than any secret. By the time the seventh winter settled over Daniel Reeves's prison sentence, the story had thinned in national headlines, replaced by newer crimes, fresher scandals, louder tragedies. But in Ashford, stories do not disappear. They compress. They settle into the soil, into memory, into the quiet way people pause when they pass Miller's Creek after dark. Time did what time always does, it layered routine over rupture. Children who had not yet been born in 2001 now walked the halls of Ashford High. To them, Emily Harper was not a classmate frozen in yearbook ink. She was a name attached to a scholarship form, a plaque. A story told in health class about personal safety and trust. History, not memory. But for those who were there, memory remained sharp. Sheriff Maria Collins retired with little ceremony, choosing not to center her departure around the case that defined her tenure. In her final interview with the local paper, she spoke not of triumph, but of persistence. Cold cases aren't dead, she said. They're waiting for someone stubborn enough to reopen them. It was the closest she ever came to claiming victory. Her successor inherited an office transformed by technology. Old evidence rooms had been digitized. Every unsolved file was cataloged for periodic review. The Harper case became training material, not for its horror, but for its patience. Detectives studied how small fragments can outlast decades. Meanwhile, Daniel Reeves filed one final motion, a federal habeas petition arguing ineffective assistance of counsel. It was long, handwritten, dense with legal citations he had memorized in the prison law library. He claimed his defense team failed to sufficiently challenge the genealogical search warrant process. He insisted that broader constitutional review was inevitable. The petition moved slowly through federal court, as such petitions do. Months passed, then years. Ultimately, it was denied without evidentiary hearing. The conviction, once again, stood untouched. The denial barely registered beyond legal circles. Ashford did not erupt. It exhaled. And yet something unexpected followed, not in court, not in law, but in confession. A former colleague of Reeves, another coach from the early 2000s, requested a meeting with investigators. He was not under suspicion. He was not implicated. But he carried something he had never shared publicly. In 2001, weeks before Emily's death, he said he noticed tension between her and Reeves during a practice scrimmage. Raised voices in a side hallway. He did not hear words clearly, only tone, sharp, defensive. When he asked later what had happened, Reeves dismissed it as teenage attitude. At the time, the colleague thought nothing of it. Now, decades later, the memory felt corrosive. Investigators documented the statement. It did not alter the conviction, but it reinforced narrative threads that had once been speculative. Emily may have pushed back. She may have threatened exposure, or perhaps she simply resisted control. In either case, the image of a final argument gained texture. The colleague wept during the interview, not out of guilt for complicity, but for silence. "I should have asked more," he said. "I should have paid attention." Silence is rarely malicious. Often it is ordinary. That is what makes it powerful. The Harper family learned of the colleague's statement through official channels. They did not seek media attention. They did not demand further action. The legal chapter was closed. But emotionally, each new detail felt like another shard sliding into place, painful, clarifying, irreversible. Ashford High, under new leadership, instituted an annual assembly on boundaries and accountability. The message was direct. Trust is earned through transparency, not reputation. Students listened, some distracted, some reflective. To many, the story felt distant, almost abstract. But to faculty who remembered 2001, the assembly carried weight. They had lived through the illusion. Years continued their quiet march. Miller's Creek flooded one spring after heavy rains, water rising over its banks, swallowing the lower trail, and nearly reaching the memorial bench. For a day, the inscription disappeared beneath murky current. When the water receded, the bench remained intact, though weathered further. The symbolism was not lost on residents. The truth may submerge temporarily under doubt or debate, but it does not dissolve. In prison, Reeves's health began to decline. Hypertension, early signs of heart disease. Age was catching up with him faster behind bars than it might have outside. He granted one final interview to a documentary filmmaker exploring the ethics of forensic genealogy. The footage, released years later, showed a man aged beyond his years, voice quieter but still resolute. "I was convicted by science people don't fully understand," he said. "And once science points at you, no one listens anymore." The documentary juxtaposed his statement with laboratory footage of DNA amplification, sterile machines humming, technicians gloved and focused. It juxtaposed his calm denial with Carol Harper standing beside the memorial bench, hand resting on carved stone. The contrast was stark. Public reaction to the film was brief, but intense. Comment sections filled with arguments over privacy versus justice. But in Ashford, the debate felt distant. For them, science was not abstract. It had a name attached to it, Emily. It had a courtroom. It had a verdict spoken aloud. One autumn evening, nearly 3 decades after the murder, a group of local teenagers gathered near the creek with flashlights, not out of morbid curiosity, but for a community service cleanup project. They collected litter, cleared brush, reinforced the walking path. The area no longer felt haunted. It felt reclaimed. That may be the quietest aftermath of all. Not the conviction, not the appeals, not the debates on privacy law, but reclamation. Ashford did not erase what happened.
It integrated it.
It stopped pretending the past was pure. It stopped clinging to the illusion that evil must arrive from elsewhere. Instead, it accepted something harder, that vigilance and compassion must coexist. Daniel Reeves remains in prison, his number replacing his title, his appeals exhausted. He will likely die behind concrete and steel. Whether he carries private acknowledgement of guilt or clings to denial until the end is known only to him. The legal system extracted its answer. The community absorbed its lesson. And Emily Harper exists now in dual form, the 17-year-old frozen in photographs and the enduring catalyst for change. She is remembered not solely as a victim of a once-cold case, but as the reason Ashford no longer mistakes familiarity for safety. On certain mornings, when fog drifts low again over Miller's Creek, older residents still feel the echo of that first discovery in 2001, the shape in the grass, the radio's crackling, the rupture of normalcy. But the fog lifts faster now. The air clears. Time did not bury the truth. It sharpened it. A small-town 2001 cold case was cracked. A trusted local figure was exposed. A community was forced to look at itself without flinching. And though the headlines have faded and the cameras have left, the deeper imprint remains, in policies rewritten, in vigilance renewed, in the understanding that justice may move slowly, but it moves. The creek flows. The bench stands. The prison gates close each night with mechanical certainty. And somewhere between flowing water and locked steel lives the enduring reminder that silence can stretch for decades, but it cannot outlast truth. The 8th year after the conviction did not arrive with headlines. It arrived with quiet erosion. Paint peeled from the old press clippings still taped inside the sheriff's archive room. The ink on the memorial bench dulled further under sun and frost. Even outrage, even shock, eventually fades into something softer. Not forgiveness, not forgetting, but a thinning of intensity. Ashford had learned to live with the story the way a body learns to live with scar tissue. It no longer bled. It ached when pressed. Then came the letter. It was addressed to Sheriff Collins, though she had retired 3 years earlier. Forwarded from the department to her home. No return address beyond a prison facility stamp. Daniel Reeves's handwriting, unmistakable, tight, deliberate, controlled. She opened it at her kitchen table. Inside, there was no confession, no apology, but there was something new. Reeves wrote that he had been revisiting his memories with clarity. He described October 12, 2001. In detail he had never previously shared publicly. The pharmacy parking lot, the chill in the air, the conversation about college applications. He insisted again that he did not kill Emily. But he admitted something subtle and startling. He had driven to Miller's Creek that night. He claimed he went there alone. According to the letter, after leaving the pharmacy, he felt unsettled by their conversation. He wrote that Emily had confronted him about rumors. He did not specify what rumors. He described feeling anxious, needing air, and driving aimlessly before parking near the creek to clear his head. He said he placed the 10:15 p.m. call to his sister from that location, not as an alibi, but as coincidence. He insisted he never saw Emily again after she drove away from the pharmacy. It was the first time he acknowledged being near the crime scene. Collins read the paragraph 3 times. The admission did not exonerate him. It did not negate the DNA. But it shifted tone. In court, Reeves had implied he was home by 10:15. Now he conceded he was near the creek. He framed it as misremembered detail, not deception. He said trauma from wrongful conviction had distorted timelines in his memory. Collins contacted the current sheriff immediately. The letter became evidence in the court of public opinion, though legally it changed little. Prosecutors reviewed it carefully. They found it self-serving, an attempt to reconcile conflicting cell tower data while maintaining innocence. Yet for the Harper family, the admission struck like a delayed thunderclap. He had been there. For years, he denied proximity. Now, he confirmed it. Carol Harper released a brief statement through her attorney. He was there. Emily was there. The rest speaks for itself. But speculation reignited. If Reeves drove to the creek independently, as he claimed, could he have encountered Emily by coincidence? Could someone else have attacked her after she arrived for another reason? The defense community online seized upon the ambiguity, weaving alternate timelines. But prosecutors countered with the same unmovable anchor. His DNA was under her fingernails. Proximity plus genetic evidence plus fiber plus tire impressions formed a chain too cohesive to fracture with a late-stage letter. Still, something about the admission unsettled Ashford in a new way. It confirmed calculation in 2001. Even if one accepted his version that he drove to the creek alone, it meant he had concealed that fact for 2 decades. It meant his testimony and interviews were incomplete at best, deliberately false at worst. The lie about location, whether strategic or panicked, deepened the breach of trust beyond the murder itself. Investigators quietly re-examined archived maps. They compared Reeves's described route with Emily's likely driving path. The overlap was too precise to dismiss as random wandering. County Road 8 was not a common detour without purpose. It led nowhere but farmland and water. The letter also contained another line that drew attention. I remember headlights behind me for a moment. No elaboration. No identification. Just a fragment. Was it invention? Was it a seed planted to suggest alternative suspects? Or was it a final manipulation, an attempt to reopen doubt without accepting guilt? Detectives tracked down traffic reports from that night again, though decades had eroded most data. No record of additional vehicles was preserved beyond the passing motorist already documented. The absence of confirmation did not eliminate possibility, but it narrowed it. The appellate court declined to reopen the case based on the letter alone. Life in Ashford resumed its tempered rhythm, but the psychological shift remained. The case had evolved from mystery to resolution to something more layered, a study in human narrative control. Reeves had controlled his image for years. Then the courtroom seized control through evidence. Now, from prison, he attempted to retake narrative ground through selective admission. The documentary filmmaker returned to Ashford seeking comment on the letter. Sheriff Collins declined an on-camera interview but offered a written response. Partial truth does not outweigh complete evidence. The phrase circulated widely. Meanwhile, Emily's former classmates approached their 40s. Some had children nearing the age she was when she died. Perspective shifted. What once felt like teenage tragedy now felt like stolen adulthood. They spoke about her differently, less as a frozen peer, more as a life interrupted. One classmate organized a community 5K run along a route that intentionally avoided Miller's Creek. Not from fear, but from choice. The event raised funds for domestic violence awareness and youth advocacy programs. The turnout was larger than expected. Hundreds gathered in bright shirts bearing Emily's name. Reclamation, again. In prison, Reeves stopped granting interviews. Rumors circulated that his health had worsened. Heart complications. A minor stroke. Official confirmation was limited. Inmate privacy laws shielded details. But one fact became clear. Time was narrowing for him in a way it had once narrowed for Emily. The asymmetry was stark. He lived on, aging within concrete walls, writing letters that complicated but did not dismantle the case against him. She remained 17 in photographs, her story told by others. Years earlier, the phrase cold case had implied stagnation. Now it carried different meaning. It meant evidence that refuses to decay. It meant patience embedded in molecules. It meant that truth can sleep without dying. The letter, instead of destabilizing Ashford, seemed to solidify something. If he was willing to concede presence after decades of denial, what else had he concealed? What else might he carry unspoken? The absence of confession became less about uncertainty and more about character. And yet, no one truly knows what passes through a man's mind when the lights dim in a prison cell and the noise recedes. Whether regret flickers, whether denial hardens, whether memory rewrites itself to survive. The creek still flows. The bench still stands. The scholarship still awards one senior each spring. The high school gym echoes with new cheers, unconnected to old shadows. But on certain evenings, when wind rustles reeds along Miller's Creek, there is an undercurrent that persists. Not fear, not doubt, but awareness. Awareness that truth can emerge in layers. Awareness that justice can withstand attempts to erode it. Awareness that even a late admission cannot outrun the fragment of resistance captured beneath a victim's fingernails on a fog-heavy night in 2001. The story has moved beyond courtroom drama, beyond appeal briefs and documentary lenses. It exists now as something quieter but firmer, a reminder etched into Ashford's collective memory. He was there. She fought back. Science remembered. And no letter, no revision, no partial acknowledgement can rewind that convergence of fact and consequence. Time moves forward. The prison doors still close with mechanical certainty. The creek keeps its steady current. And the truth, layered and tested, endures. By the 25th anniversary of Emily Harper's death, Ashford no longer felt haunted. It felt weathered. The banners for the memorial vigil were smaller now. The crowd thinner. Not because people cared less, but because grief, stretched across decades, settles into something internal. It no longer demands microphones. Inside a courtroom 2 counties away, Daniel Reeves filed what would be his final legal motion. A petition for post-conviction DNA review, not of the material that convicted him, but of trace samples collected and deemed too degraded to test in 2001. His attorneys argued that advances in forensic science might reveal unknown profiles. The implication was clear. Someone else had been there. The request was not frivolous. Technology had evolved dramatically since 2019. Low-template DNA analysis could now detect genetic fragments once considered unusable. Across the country, old cases had shifted, some convictions overturned, some strengthened. The Harper family did not object. That surprised some observers. But Carol Harper stated simply, "We have nothing to fear for more truth." The judge granted limited reanalysis. Evidence that had rested in climate-controlled storage for a quarter-century was carefully removed once more. Lab technicians handled it with gloved precision, aware that the eyes of a small town and a national true crime audience were fixed on their microscopes. Months passed. Speculation returned in waves. Podcasts revived the case. Commentators debated possibilities. Had investigators in 2001 missed a secondary contributor? Could transfer DNA from public spaces complicate interpretation? Would the results introduce ambiguity or bury it permanently? When the report was finally submitted to the court, it was thinner than expected. The degraded samples produced minimal additional data. 2 microscopic fragments from Emily's jacket cuff revealed partial profiles. Neither was sufficient to identify an individual in Cody's. One matched Emily herself. The other was too incomplete for comparison, a handful of alleles statistically insignificant. More importantly, no foreign male DNA was detected beyond Daniel Reeves's confirmed profile. No unknown attacker. No second struggle. No alternate suspect hidden in degraded fibers. The defense argued that absence of additional DNA did not prove exclusivity. Prosecutors agreed, but emphasized the inverse truth. Nothing in the reanalysis contradicted the original findings. The judge denied the motion to vacate the conviction. It was the last procedural avenue available. Reeves did not attend the ruling in person. Health reports, though unofficial, suggested he was no longer physically capable of extended court transport. He watched via a closed-circuit feed from a prison infirmary. For the first time in 25 years, there were no further filings. No pending motions. No appeals. Legally, the case had reached its endpoint. But endings in real life are rarely cinematic. There was no gasp in the courtroom.
No dramatic outburst.
Just the quiet shuffle of papers and the soft click of a microphone powering down. Outside, reporters asked Sheriff Collins, invited back as a symbolic figure, whether she felt closure. She paused before answering. "Closure isn't a moment," she said. "It's maintenance." The statement lingered. Because the truth is this, even confirmed justice requires tending. It lives in annual scholarships, in cautious hiring practices, in parents who double-check curfews, in classmates who still, occasionally, dream of senior year hallways that never fully emptied. A week after the ruling, Daniel Reeves sent no new letters. Instead, a brief notice circulated through official channels 3 months later. He had died in custody. Cardiac arrest. Age 49. The news landed without spectacle. Some expected relief. Others expected renewed anger. What emerged instead was something more complex, a muted exhale. The man at the center of 2 decades of tension was gone. Not exonerated. Not confessing. Simply gone. There would be no deathbed admission. No final revelation. Whatever lived in his private memory left with him. At Emily's gravesite, fresh flowers appeared that week. No media present. No speeches. Just quiet acknowledgement that the timeline had finally closed. Strangely, his death did not reopen wounds. It seemed to cauterize them, because the facts had already been decided by science long before his heart stopped. The DNA under Emily's fingernails remained what it was. Immutable.
Documented.
Tested and retested. The fibers remained matched. The tire impressions remained aligned. His own late admission of being near Miller's Creek remained recorded. He was there. The finality of his death removed only one variable, the possibility of narrative revision. Ashford marked the 25th anniversary not with a vigil, but with something new, a community forum on forensic advancements and cold case investigations. Detectives from neighboring counties spoke about breakthroughs in genetic genealogy. Survivors of other crimes asked questions. Students attended out of curiosity, not fear. The town had evolved. Miller's Creek still winds past farmland and cattails, but it is no longer synonymous with terror. Teenagers fish there again. Couples walk the banks at dusk. Memory remains, but it no longer dictates movement. Emily Harper's name lives in quieter ways now. A scholarship plaque polished each spring. A tree planted beside the high school parking lot, roots deep, branches steady. A reminder not only of loss, but of resistance, of evidence that endured when stories shifted. Cold cases are often described as frozen. This one was not frozen. It was patient. It waited for technology. It waited for truth to surface molecule by molecule. It waited through denial, through appeals, through partial admissions and final silence. And when the last appeal failed and the last breath left the man convicted, the case did not explode into drama. It settled. Settled into record books. Settled into archives. Settled into the collective understanding that justice is not theatrical, it is cumulative. There are no more court dates on the calendar. No more interviews scheduled. No more letters arriving at retired sheriffs' homes. Just the steady current of time moving forward, the same current that once flowed beneath fog at Miller's Creek on an October night in 2001. She was 17. She fought back. Science remembered. The town endured. And now, finally, the story rests, not erased, not forgotten, but complete. There is a misconception about justice. People imagine a verdict as a door slamming shut, a gavel strike, a clean ending. In reality, justice behaves more like sediment in water. It settles slowly, almost invisibly, long after the turbulence above has calmed. By the time the 30th year approached since Emily Harper's death, Ashford had changed in ways that no headline could measure. The old pharmacy, where she had her final conversation with Daniel Reeves, was no longer a pharmacy. It became a bakery for a time, then a real estate office. Eventually, it was renovated into a small co-working space with glass walls and soft lighting. Young professionals typed on laptops where fluorescent bulbs once hummed overhead in 2001. Few of them knew the exact spot in the parking lot where two teenagers stood under a flickering lamp and argued about rumors. Fewer still knew how close proximity and pride can collide with irreversible consequence. But the case reshaped more than buildings. It reshaped procedure. Ashford's police department, once a modest rural unit, invested in digital archiving systems after the conviction. Every shred of physical evidence now receives dual storage documentation. Interviews are recorded redundantly. Chain of custody logs are scanned and encrypted. The lesson was simple. Time will test everything. Prepare for that test on day one. The state legislature even cited the Harper case during debate over expanded funding for forensic backlog reduction. Lawmakers referenced how delayed DNA testing in 2001 postponed justice by nearly 2 decades. The bill passed with bipartisan support. Emily's story moved beyond tragedy. It became precedent. Meanwhile, a generation grew up knowing the outcome from the beginning. For them, the mystery never existed. Daniel Reeves was not a suspect. He was a convicted murderer whose appeals had failed and who had died in custody. The ambiguity that once divided Ashford was historical footnote. Yet memory still lingered in subtler ways. Carol Harper aged with grace that reporters once described as resilience. But resilience is often misunderstood. It is not strength without fracture. It is fracture that refuses collapse. In a recorded interview conducted years after Reeves's death, meant for local archives, not national television, she said something striking. I stopped waiting for him to confess. I started waiting for myself to feel peace. Peace, she admitted, did not arrive when the DNA matched. It did not arrive at sentencing. It did not arrive when the final appeal failed. It arrived gradually, in ordinary mornings, in garden soil beneath her fingernails, in hearing her granddaughter laugh at 17 years old and realizing fear no longer dominated the sound. Daniel Reeves never confessed. That absence will always exist as a question mark at the edge of the record. Not a legal one, a psychological one. Why deny what science proved? Was it pride? Was it self-preservation? Was it a version of reality rewritten so completely that even he believed it? Experts in criminal psychology often speak about cognitive restructuring, the mind's ability to reshape memory to avoid annihilating guilt. Whether that applied to Reeves remains unknowable. What is known is this. On October 12, 2001, he was at Miller's Creek. His DNA was beneath Emily's fingernails. Fibers from his jacket matched those found on her clothing. Tire impressions aligned with his vehicle. He later admitted proximity he once denied. He exhausted every appeal. He died incarcerated. The record is stable. But the story, the human story, extends beyond bullet points. Ashford High School installed a permanent exhibit near the library entrance titled Evidence and Endurance. It does not display graphic details. Instead, it walks students through the evolution of forensic science from 2001 to the present. It teaches how preservation matters, how patience matters, how truth can outlast noise. Emily's senior portrait sits at the end of the display, not as a symbol of victimhood, but as a reminder of interrupted potential. Each spring, the scholarship awarded in her name includes a prompt. Write about a moment when persistence mattered more than speed. The essays are thoughtful. Some students reference athletics. Others reference academic setbacks. A few mention the cold case that defined their town's history. None of them were alive when it happened. That is time's quiet mercy. Miller's Creek looks smaller now. Or perhaps memory once magnified it. Children skip stones along its banks. Photographers capture golden hour reflections without sensing the weight that once hovered there. The creek does what water has always done. It moves forward, indifferent to human narrative. And yet, if you stand very still at dusk, when light thins and wind presses softly through reeds, you can almost feel the layered past beneath the present. Not ominous, not threatening, just present. Stories do not vanish. They sediment. They become foundation. The Harper case no longer dominates headlines. It surfaces occasionally in academic journals discussing cold case methodology. It appears in training seminars for rural investigators. It is cited as example of how delayed testing can both hinder and ultimately secure justice. For Ashford, it is no longer an open wound. It is scar tissue, strong, textured, permanent. And perhaps that is the true final chapter. Not the arrest, not the conviction, not the final appeal, not even the death of the man responsible. The final chapter is continuity. A town that did not fracture beyond repair. A family that transformed grief into advocacy. A justice system that adapted under scrutiny. A generation that learned the value of preservation. Emily Harper remains 17 in photographs. But in the arc of the town's evolution, she became something enduring, not defined solely by how she died, but by what persisted because she fought back. Science remembered. Records endured. Time tested everything. And when the noise faded, when the courtroom lights dimmed, when the prison doors closed for the last time, what remained was not spectacle. It was steadiness. The kind that does not demand attention. The kind that simply holds. The creek flows. The seasons turn. The evidence rests in climate-controlled silence. And somewhere in Ashford, under ordinary sky and ordinary sun, life continues, not untouched by the past, but strengthened by having faced it. The case is closed. The story at last complete. Long after the files were stamped closed and archived, the Harper case began living a second life. Not in courtrooms. In classrooms. At the State Forensic Training Academy, Instructors began referencing Ashford's 2001 investigation as a turning point, not because it was perfect, but because it wasn't. The early missteps, the delayed DNA backlog, the reliance on incomplete timelines, all of it became case study material. Cadets were shown how evidence collected in a small-town jurisdiction, stored carefully but left technologically stranded, eventually became the decisive instrument of justice nearly 2 decades later. The lesson was simple and sobering. Time does not erase evidence. People do. And preservation can outlast doubt. By the 35th year since Emily Harper's death, advances in genetic genealogy had revolutionized dozens of cold cases nationwide. Investigators in other states used distant cousin matches and public databases to identify perpetrators long after traditional methods failed. The Harper case did not require genealogy. Daniel Reeves's DNA was already in the system by the time retesting occurred, but it was often mentioned alongside those breakthroughs as part of the same era of scientific awakening. One forensic scientist who worked on the 2019 retest later gave a lecture describing the moment the lab confirmed the match. It wasn't dramatic, she told the audience. It was numbers aligning on a screen. But sometimes numbers are louder than confessions. That sentence traveled. Students quoted it in research papers. Crime analysts referenced it in conference slides. A quiet town's tragedy had entered professional doctrine. Back in Ashford, life continued to layer itself over the past. Carol Harper passed away peacefully at 83, surrounded by family. Her obituary mentioned Emily, of course. But it also mentioned the scholarship fund, the domestic violence awareness work, and the legislative testimony she provided during forensic funding hearings. Her legacy was no longer defined solely by loss. At her memorial service, the church pews were filled with people who had not even lived in Ashford in 2001. Teachers, social workers, law enforcement officers, students who received the Harper Scholarship. They spoke not about the crime, but about persistence. Daniel Reeves's name was not mentioned once. That silence felt deliberate. Across the country, as more cold cases were solved through advancing technology, a subtle shift occurred in public perception. The phrase, "you got away with it," began to lose credibility. Detectives repeated a new mantra in interviews: the clock favors the patient. The Harper case embodied that idea. Because for 18 years, it looked stalled. For 18 years, suspicion hovered without proof strong enough to convict. Friendships fractured. Rumors flourished. The absence of closure shaped social gravity in Ashford. And yet, beneath that stagnation, evidence waited in sterile packaging. The future had already been seeded inside those envelopes. By the 40th anniversary, the high school exhibit was expanded. It included interactive modules explaining mitochondrial DNA, trace fiber analysis, and advancements in digital chain of custody systems. Students scanned QR codes to see anonymized lab procedures. They learned not just what happened, but how knowledge evolves. Emily's portrait remained at the end of the display. Still 17. Still smiling into a camera that had no idea what history would do with that image. A visiting criminology professor once asked a group of seniors what they thought the most important element of the case was. One student answered that she fought back. Another said that they kept the evidence. A third paused before adding that people didn't stop asking. All three were correct, because justice in this case was not a single event. It was resistance in multiple forms: physical, procedural, emotional. And what of Daniel Reeves? In archived prison correspondence reviewed years later by researchers studying denial in convicted offenders, his letters revealed a pattern. He never directly confessed, but he increasingly avoided direct denial. Language softened. Statements shifted from "I wasn't there" to "I don't remember it that way." From "I didn't touch her" to "I never meant for things to go wrong." Subtle linguistic drift. Scholars debated its meaning. Was it erosion of certainty? Strategic ambiguity? A psyche recalibrating under the weight of incontrovertible science? There would never be definitive answers. He died without public confession. But confession, as the Harper family eventually understood, is not prerequisite to truth. The creek still runs. Farmhouses along County Road 8 have new paint, new families, new children who splash in water unaware of the layered past beneath its surface. And that is perhaps the most profound evolution of all. The place where fear once rooted itself is no longer governed by it. Memory exists, but it does not dominate. The Harper case now lives primarily in archives, academic journals, and the institutional memory of law enforcement. It surfaces in discussions about backlog funding. It appears in presentations about rural investigative challenges. It is cited when policymakers argue that small departments deserve access to advanced forensic resources. A tragedy became infrastructure reform. A loss became legislative momentum. A cold case became curriculum. 40 years after a fog-heavy October night, the town does not feel defined by violence. It feels defined by endurance. Because endurance is quieter than outrage, stronger than rumor, longer-lasting than denial. Emily Harper remains frozen in photographs, but the world around her image moved forward. Improved protocols, improved science, improved understanding of how time interacts with truth. Some evenings, when dusk settles over Miller's Creek and the air cools just enough to resemble early fall, older residents still pause. Not in fear, in recognition. Recognition that justice is rarely immediate. Recognition that truth can be delayed without being destroyed. Recognition that waiting, when paired with preservation, is not passive. It is strategic. The evidence rests. The records hold. The scholarship continues. The exhibit stands. The creek flows. And in the long arc between crime and consequence, one small town proved something quietly powerful. Time does not always protect the guilty. Sometimes, it prepares the proof. Half a century after October 12, 2001, there are no first-hand witnesses left in Ashford. Not to the argument in the pharmacy parking lot. Not to the fog along Miller's Creek. Not to the courtroom where DNA finally spoke loud enough to end debate. Time has completed its quiet sweep. The high school building has been renovated twice. The original lockers replaced. The gym floor resurfaced. The co-working space that once stood where the pharmacy had been eventually became a wellness clinic. Ownership changes. Paint changes. Streetlights modernize. But the case remains. Not as trauma, as record. The Harper Scholarship has now funded 3 generations of students. Its language evolved over the decades. What once referenced justice through science now speaks more broadly of integrity, persistence, and civic responsibility. The name remains. The meaning deepens. In the State Archives building, miles from Ashford, a climate-controlled vault holds labeled boxes from early 21st century investigations. Among them, the Harper File, digitized transcripts, photographic logs, fiber analysis reports, the original 2019 DNA confirmation sheet. Researchers occasionally request access. They do not come seeking scandal. They come studying methodology. The case is now cited in academic literature about evidence retention policy reform in rural jurisdictions. It appears in textbooks discussing the transitional era between analog record-keeping and digital forensic integration. It is referenced when professors lecture about the psychological endurance required in long-term investigations. Emily Harper's name exists in footnotes, in citations, in the structured language of scholarship. And yet, beneath those formal references, there remains something profoundly human. Because 50 years later, what endures most is not the perpetrator's name. It is the lesson. Daniel Reeves's grave, located in a modest cemetery near the state prison, receives no visitors. His name exists in databases and court records, but it carries no cultural gravity. His denials dissolved with time. His appeals are archived as procedural history. His late admission of proximity is studied as example of narrative recalibration under evidentiary pressure. He is a subject of analysis. Emily, by contrast, became symbol, not of victimhood, but of preservation. Her resistance in a moment of terror left microscopic proof that would outlive argument. That singular biological trace became the axis on which decades turned. Without it, the case might have remained permanently suspended in suspicion. With it, the future had leverage. By the 50th anniversary, Miller's Creek has narrowed slightly due to environmental shifts. Conservation efforts in the region restored native plant life along its banks. Schoolchildren participate in ecological field trips there now. They test water samples. They identify insects. They sketch the movement of current. Their teachers mention that the site was once part of an important local history case. They do not linger on violence. They emphasize preservation. Because that is what this story ultimately became about. Preserving evidence. Preserving hope. Preserving the idea that truth, even delayed, remains retrievable. The concept of a cold case has transformed nationally over the past 5 decades. Where once it implied dormancy, it now implies deferred activation. Investigative agencies maintain active cold case units funded by legislation influenced by early 21st century breakthroughs. Genetic databases expanded under tighter ethical frameworks. Evidence storage standards are federally audited. The Harper case was not the only catalyst, but it was part of the wave. And waves reshape shorelines gradually. If you walk through Ashford today, you would not sense tragedy embedded in its sidewalks. You would sense continuity. New storefronts, solar panels, electric buses humming where diesel engines once roared. The town survived its darkest chapter and then grew beyond it. That growth is the final resolution. Not revenge. Not spectacle. Growth. There is something almost paradoxical about how the case is remembered now. The specifics, the tire impressions, the fiber match, the partial degraded samples retested decades later, are studied in professional settings. But among residents, what remains is simpler. She fought. They waited. Science answered. Time, often blamed for eroding justice, in this instance strengthened it. Every year that passed without confession did not weaken the case. It fortified the significance of evidence. When the final appeal failed, when the final breath left the convicted man, when the final anniversary vigil became a quiet scholarship luncheon instead, the narrative shifted from crime to consequence, from shock to structure, from grief to governance. On the 50th anniversary, the State Forensic Academy unveiled a new lecture hall dedicated to advancements in long-term evidence analysis. A small plaque near the entrance includes several case references. One of them is Harper v. State, 2019 Conviction Review. Just a line of text.
No dramatic summary. No emotional framing.
Because by then, emotion is no longer the driver.
Understanding is.
And perhaps that is the truest ending any cold case can achieve. Not endless retelling.
Not mythologizing.
Integration. The story of a 17-year-old girl in 2001 became part of institutional memory. It shaped budgets, protocols, training manuals, digital infrastructure. It taught a generation of investigators that patience is not weakness, it is preparation. 50 years later, the creek still flows. The evidence still rests in its controlled archive. The scholarship still carries her name. The town still breathes. There are no more parts to add. No hidden suspect waiting in degraded DNA. No final confession sealed in forgotten letters. Just the steady certainty of documented truth. And in that certainty lies something rare. A cold case that did not fade. A town that did not fracture. A record that did not fail. Time moved forward, as it always does. But this time, it carried justice with it. By the 70th anniversary of October 12, 2001, no one living in Ashford can say, "I remember where I was that night." Memory has yielded entirely to history. The town itself has expanded beyond its old borders. County Road 8, once a narrow strip leading only to farmland and Miller's Creek, is now part of a larger bypass system. Traffic hums steadily where silence once dominated. Streetlights are solar-powered. Surveillance infrastructure is embedded seamlessly into public planning. Progress is rarely aware of what it covers. Yet beneath layers of asphalt and infrastructure lies a case that helped shape the systems now taken for granted. In state criminal justice textbooks, The Harper investigation is categorized under Transitional Forensic Era Cases, 1995 to 2025. It sits alongside other landmark investigations that bridge the gap between early DNA capability and modern genomic precision. The description is clinical. Initial evidentiary preservation enabled post-backlog DNA analysis, resulting in conviction. Case cited in funding reform debates and long-term evidence retention standards. No adjectives.
No fog.
No trembling hands. History condenses emotion into structure. At the National Forensic Policy Conference, now an annual global event, one of the keynote speakers referenced the Harper case while discussing intergenerational justice. The speaker did not dramatize it. She presented it as data. Delayed testing did not prevent resolution, she said. It emphasized the necessity of preservation discipline. Applause followed. The name Emily Harper appeared briefly on a projection screen before sliding into the next bullet point. This is how legacies mature, from grief to governance to footnote. Back in Ashford, Millers Creek is part of a protected environmental corridor. Drones monitor water quality. Students study biodiversity trends. The site once marked by fear is now mapped for sustainability research. No plaques mark the exact location where she was found. That absence is intentional. The town council, decades earlier, voted against permanent markers at the creek. Their reasoning was clear. Memorials belong to people, not crime scenes. So the scholarship endures. The high school, now a multi-campus learning complex, still awards the Harper Scholarship each year. The criteria evolved again. It now includes a component requiring applicants to demonstrate commitment to ethical technology use and civic accountability. The connection may seem indirect. It is not. The case helped ignite reforms in forensic funding, which influenced broader public trust and institutional accountability. That ripple effect expanded over decades into digital transparency initiatives across the state. From one preserved DNA sample grew policy branches no one in 2001 could have predicted. Daniel Reeves's name, by contrast, rarely surfaces outside archival databases. In criminology circles, his case is sometimes referenced in studies of long-term denial behavior. Linguistic analysts still cite the subtle shift in his prison letters, how definitive denial softened into ambiguous phrasing. But culturally, he has receded. Perpetrators often imagine their silence grants them control over narrative. Time rarely honors that assumption. He died without confession. And history moved on without needing one. 70 years transforms outrage into architecture. The original case files, once stored in paper boxes, were digitized in the 2030s. In the 2050s, they were migrated to quantum-encrypted archival systems. Preservation no longer depends on physical climate control alone. It exists redundantly across secure networks. Evidence, once vulnerable to degradation, now survives technological epochs. That is the quiet triumph embedded within the story. Not that a killer was convicted, but that a small town's commitment to keeping evidence intact contributed to a culture where preservation became standardized. There is a difference between solving a crime and strengthening a system. The Harper case did both. On the 70th anniversary, a local historian delivered a lecture titled, "When Patience Changed Policy." He spoke not about the violence itself, but about the decades-long arc from backlog to breakthrough. Justice, he concluded, is sometimes an inheritance. An inheritance built not on vengeance, but on diligence. If you stand near Millers Creek today, the landscape feels ordinary. Wind brushes reeds. Water reflects sky. The hum of distant vehicles replaces rural silence. Nothing in the terrain reveals the layered past beneath it. And that is appropriate, because the story's power no longer resides in place. It resides in practice. In forensic labs that test immediately rather than postpone indefinitely. In legislation that funds rural departments equitably. In digital systems that prevent evidence loss. In communities that understand waiting is not surrender. 70 years ago, a 17-year-old girl resisted. Her resistance left trace proof. That proof endured long enough to align with advancing science. That alignment produced conviction. That conviction influenced policy. That policy reshaped procedure. And procedure, once normalized, became invisible, absorbed into the fabric of everyday governance. Few stories travel that far. Most fade. This one integrated. There are no more anniversaries marked by candlelight. No more debates about guilt.
No lingering appeals.
Only structured knowledge, embedded in training manuals, cited in funding bills, archived in secure databases. History has replaced memory. And in that transition lies the final transformation of a cold case into something enduring. The creek flows. The systems hold. The record remains intact. Time, relentless, indifferent, carried everything forward. And yet, beneath its current, one truth continues quietly. Evidence preserved is justice postponed, not denied. 70 years later, that principle stands stronger than ever.